Scientology could be called, well, you could call it a religion of religions.
And we've been pretty intense this last week, eh?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're up to the third part now, the last part of our interview.
Yep.
And it's cool. It's good. I'm happy to get through these questions. The first interview, I was a bit rushed, trying to get through things. And but what I think we should do today is that we'll keep on chatting, but in the last part of the interview, if I haven't got the questions answered, we'll just do fast answering. So I'll just shoot off the questions and get as fast answer as I can. What do you think about that?
Yeah, whichever way. I mean, let's, you know, I am known for meandering and talking. And so I'll try to be good and answer the questions succinctly, or succinctly, as some people say.
It'll be in the last half hour, it will be a bit more like an auditing session.
Great.
But I will not be auditing you.
I'd like to indicate I'm not auditing you.
Yeah.
I am writing this down for ethics instead.
Yeah. Any overts you say though will be taken into
consideration.
So you got up to OT5 when you're involved with the church?
I did.
And you saw the beginning of the independent movement?
Yes, I was at the very middle of it in the UK. I was the chairman of the OT Committee UK. And so I was kind of, I don't know what you'd say, but I protected the independents from the Guardian's Office, the Guardian's Office of Special Affairs, as it later became. So I was the public relations, legal sort of function. I didn't do any of the nasty intelligence stuff, though. Though the former head of B1 London did offer to help me harass Scientology, and I could have went, that's why I left.
Okay, let's continue with what was we started talking about in the last interview. And what you said something that was really, really interesting, because I've always sort of wondered about this, because David Mayo seemed to sort of distance himself a bit from Scientology. And you said last interview that Mayo renounced the tech.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate and be specific? Like, do you mean that he, like, because I've heard that he suggested that OT3 could be entirely false, but are you saying that, like, across the board, a lot of it he thinks is bullshit, or what?
Yeah, the whole thing. I hadn't spoken with him for years because in 1996 I decided I'd had enough of being steamrolled by Scientology, and so I stopped writing about it. And in 2013 I came back because I realized that many people just don't recover. They could spend decades afterwards still caught up and entangled in all of these ideas, not able to find a way out of them. It's much more elaborate than any other belief system that I've encountered, and I've studied a lot of belief systems. So in 2013, when David heard that I was back on the scene, he contacted me and said he wanted to talk. And we talked for 3 hours. And it was a remarkable conversation because, to tell you the truth, I met David first in 1986. Well, I've gone all blurry. And
it was an apparition.
Yes. Incredible. I was around him.
It's the BTs. They're trying to interfere with you because you're going into some deep stuff. It's the worst. Special affairs. It's someone trying to qualify for OT8 and they're trying to interfere.
Yeah, and let's face it, if they really had any chops, they'd have erased me by now, making my picture go fuzzy. That's nothing. Even I can do that. When I met him, I first met him in September '86 in Palo Alto when he was at the Advanced Ability Center. We'd been in touch, but I met him, I interviewed him. I was there for a couple of weeks. Then I went to LA and I came back for a couple of weeks. I was back there and spent time with him in '88. And I didn't like him. Plain and simple. I get on with almost anybody. Well, that was what I worked out in 2013, that the man I talked to in 2013, I got on with very well. And I realized it was something incredibly simple. when he was put through the running program, running around a pole in the desert at 100 degrees Fahrenheit,
AKA cause resurgence.
Yeah, he lost all of his teeth as a consequence of the dehydration. And so when I met him, he was having very painful dental surgery and he didn't smile. And it was that simple, and he seemed very cold. And when I talked to him in 2013, I realized that he's actually a very decent, compassionate sort of man. Which, hadn't got close to him. So he told me that basically he'd done some psychology courses, and when he was working, when I first went to the Advanced Ability Center in '86, Frank Sarge-Gabodi was running it. He's quite interesting because of course he was a fully qualified psychiatrist who then became involved in Scientology. And I think he's unique. I don't think there's anybody else that you could say that about. And he was a research psychiatrist, qualified at Stanford, Cambridge in the UK, where he did his master's and then did a doctorate at Stanford. And his childhood friend, Gary French, got him involved. And he set up a mission, he ran a mission, and then they defected, as did so many of the missions during the early 1980s, because of the pressure that was put upon them by Hubbard through the Commodore's Messenger organization. And they ran an independent center, and this was called the Advanced Ability Center because it was affiliated with David Mayo's center in Santa Barbara. Then David moved there, and Sarge paid him quite well. And everybody wanted to go there. I mean, I remember meeting the physicist Hal Puthoff's wife was there when I went there. And Hal Puthoff ran the Stanford Research Institute things with Uri Geller, the remote viewing things, which were a huge sensation in the 70s. And later, when Hal was trying to say publicly that he'd never really been that involved with Scientology, I pointed out he'd done OT3. And when I met his wife, she was doing OT5. So I think they were pretty involved. But
so Hal's wife was an independent.
Yes, I think Hal himself by that time had decided he didn't want to do any more. He was a professor at the Texas University, which is one of the significant places for the study of physics, alongside probably MIT in the US. So anyway, there were a lot of people there, and they all wanted to meet David, and David was a great star. And the thing I did like about him was that he quite obviously he cringed at the adulation. He really didn't like it, and that I did admire. But we spent time together, and they were still giving advanced ability level 3, as they called it, OT3. And I was long out of Scientology. I left completely in '84. And I pleaded with them to stop doing two things. The OT levels, because I'd seen the damage. We talked about that in our last conversation. I'd seen people going psychotic doing this material. I'd seen people's lives ruined by trying to find body thetans, and it's madness. It's absolutely in contradiction to the auditor's code, which says you never evaluate for the pre-clear. Telling them the date of the incident, the content of the incident, it's just wrong. It goes against everything. If OT3 is real, people will find it on their own, the wall of fire. But I'd seen the damage it did, and I pleaded with Sarge-Gabodi and David Mayo to stop doing it. When I went back in that in the purification rundown, because I was aware of deaths on the purification rundown. There were 2 deaths in East Grinstead when the rundown was first released. I'd seen a guy who was a black belt in Taekwondo and Karate, a very sharp guy, who had come back from doing the purification rundown in Florida. He was in a wheelchair and he could barely form a sentence anymore. So, these massive doses of vitamins. And of course, it was run at too high a temperature for the first 6 months. So people got, they got brain damage doing it.
Yeah, I think it's probably too hot, and certainly too much vitamins, because you actually feel sick when you get up to the high amount, and the sick is your body saying, I don't want this. Your body's saying this is just too much. Like, I agree, maybe you need to take a bunch of vitamins, but it's like there's a point where it's just ridiculous, and your body's actually going, this is disgusting. I can't handle all these vitamins. It's insane, really. It's so much vitamins. It's crazy.
Yes, and they're vitamins because a deficiency of one of them will give you a syndrome. So scurvy for vitamin C, for example, you don't need them for anything else. So taking huge quantities of them, what happens is with the water-based ones like vitamin C, that if you take 10 grams of vitamin C a day, your body will be excreting that vitamin C. You can measure it in the urine. It's just being peed out.
Yeah, just being pissed out. Yeah.
And then if you stop taking it, you'll get the deficiency syndrome because your body's got used to getting rid of it. So you'll feel worse.
And you know when because I've been, involved with saunas and stuff. And when your body craves something, like I had it with like fruit juice or something, body would be like, oh, I want fruit juice or whatever. And I'll go and get fruit juice and it'll be like the best thing ever. When your body craves it, you don't feel repulsed when you're taking it. You're like, like when you're in a desert and you've got water, you're like, oh, you gobble it down. So with the vitamins, the reaction that people are getting, like, it's just your body's not craving it. If it was craving the vitamins, and you'll be like, oh, vitamin D, vitamin C, you know what I mean? You're gobbling it down. Yeah.
When we did the Toronto Getting Clear conference in 2015, which is all up online on Vimeo for, like $3 Australian a lecture or something, there was an astonishing woman, the Professor Jim Beverly, who helped me put it together, found this woman who was a toxicologist, Angela Harris, and she did a deconstruction of the purification rundown based upon the bulletins. And she just went through it line by line and said, well, as he says here, this is a supposition. It's not proved. As he says here, there is no evidence for this. And they didn't bother to find any evidence. And it shows you exactly Hubbard's research path, which is, I've had a thought, it's therefore true. Not 1,000 cases in a gold standard study, then replicated by separate people. But I think this is a good idea.
Yeah, and LSD's water-based and apparently doesn't stay in the body. And from my looking into it, the flashback isn't because it's getting re-released in the body. The flashback relates to, like, LSD, I think, opens up some part of the mind, and then that can get opened up again. But it's not because you got LSD chemical in you, because I've heard
it's not storable.
Sometimes people can have a flashback when they're lying in the sun, and something to do with the sun waking up the part of the brain, like the pineal or something. And and they mix LSD with water or something like that. So it's like, it just, I don't know, it doesn't quite hold water. Yeah.
No, nothing that's water soluble can be retained by the human body. So that was nonsense. Let me tell you something else.
But also, they can't test. Can they even test that somebody's even had LSD like a month later? They can't. They can only test it within 3-day period or something, because it goes out of the body.
Yeah, you might be able to test metabolites in the hair. You might be. I don't know. I know you can with cannabis and with cocaine. I don't really know with LSD, but you can't test the substance itself. It's gone. I talked with a doctor who was the doctor for the purification rundown when it was first run at St. Hill, which is why I'm confident that 2 people died, because he told me they had. And I tracked one of them down. I found that this guy had been found. He'd fallen off his bicycle and just dropped dead in East Grinstead, a guy in his 40s. And talking to this doctor, I said, I've come to the point of view, and this doctor was a nutritional doctor, so he's an expert on vitamins and medicines. I've come to the point of view that it's probably something in the vitamins that's causing the trip. And I said, I think it's the B vitamins. And he just looked straight at me and said, it's vitamin B1.
What do you
High
mean?
doses
What trip do you mean?
An acid trip, an LSD experience, what you're calling a flashback.
Oh, in the sauna, someone having
vitamin B1 taken in large doses can cause hallucinations, and the doses on the purification rundown certainly qualify.
Oh wow, yeah, because I had a friend who I remember, he said he'd done LSD once or something, and then he did his purif, and it took him like 100 days, but he wasn't a heavy drug case at all, but he'd taken a while, and I think he said it was because of LSD, and I kind of thought, he must have been getting reactions or something to make him think he needed to keep on going into the sauna.
And bear in mind that Hubbard had the psychiatric drug Vistaril in his body at autopsy, so he wasn't against the use of drugs personally. That this was just something he sold to us.
Yeah, and he wasn't pro personally. He wasn't pro detoxing, because he had all these chemicals in him, and he didn't give a shit about his body.
No, and there's no evidence that he ever did the purification rundown. He was too fat and lazy for that.
Well, yeah. I don't think he would have followed the rules of it and stuff. So we were talking about this Mayo stuff.
Which I got to OT3 and I was saying that I said, I pleaded with them to stop doing it because it's crazy nonsense, and it telling somebody that they're split into thousands of little beings, it's not very helpful.
And also for people who are listening, for someone who's not involved in Scientology, hearing that it doesn't have quite an effect, but when I think you've had the years of the brainwashing and you really respect what Hubbard says, then it really has an influence hearing that sort of stuff. It's different, you can't understand unless, in your world, you're really into Hubbard and stuff like that. And like when he says you can get the side effect of the OT levels, someone on the street can say that doesn't mean anything, but when you hear it from Hubbard, it's like, this is fact. And that really gets into people's minds.
Yeah, he is considered to be the wisest man who ever lived by Scientologists, and yes, he's believed it. You're exactly right. I'd been in Scientology for 7 years before I did OT3, and it's increments of dissonance that we baby steps. We buy into a little bit, and then we go a little bit further, and 7 years later, I sat down and I read the OT3 pack, and I still looked at it and went, this is weird. I didn't go, oh, wow, fantastic revelation. I mean, I'd looked at the book Scientology, History of Man, and thought, well, he was having a bad week that week. I'd never, because it wasn't on any of the courses I did. So I thought, well, he just had some silly ideas about, we're all descended from clams, for example. And the Piltdown Man, which he seemed to, it's still in the book. It's been exposed as a fraud since the 1950s, but it's still in that book. That they're this ancestor of man. So when I went back in 88, they'd stopped giving OT3, and they now were doing traumatic incident reduction, or Dianetics, as we used to call it. And they'd pretty much thrown everything else away. And the Institute for Research into Metapsychology, which is what Sarge's lot came to be called, and my single claim to fame is that I gave him the word metapsychology because he was looking for something to call the institute. And Sarge, because he'd been a psychiatrist, had all of the works of Freud in his life, just this huge row of books. And he probably read them as well. I pulled one of them out, and there was this word metapsychology. And I said, Sarge, why don't you call it metapsychology? It's like, and away we went. But they'd stopped doing that.
Was that because of your, when you sat down and spoke with Mayo and you suggested that OT3 is bullshit, is that what led on to encouraged him to go on to get rid of all that stuff? Or
I don't think so. They were adamant they were going to keep on doing it. I think that, I was one of the people that said something, and Sarge Gabodi is an incredibly highly educated and clever human being. And I think they'd just they'd stripped away the grades, they'd stripped away the objective processes, and all they were left with was Dianetics. And they used a form of R3R, Routine 3 revised, the later form of Dianetics, new era Dianetics, as it was called, which is from 77, 78. Moved to the beginning of the incident, tell me when you're there, all of that good stuff. And that's what the Institute for Research into Metapsychology have carried on doing, traumatic incident reduction.
And was that the group that Mayo was involved with?
Yes, he's one of the founders of that group when his advanced ability centers move over and become that. So in 2013, when we talked, we had a lot of catching up to do. And he told me, I didn't, if I'm into, there's a situation where, now I couldn't care less, and I'll just tell you exactly what I feel, okay? It's just the way it's become. But while I was still concerned to gather people's information and evidence, I wouldn't contradict them. I'd let them tell me the whole story. It's like I had a guy who spent 3 nights, Brian Rubinek, trying to persuade me that Ron Hubbard didn't know about the break-ins. And on the end of the 3rd night, and he'd been Hubbard's bodyguard on the ship, he was the guy that ran Michael Meisner doing the break-ins, so he claimed, and all of that. So the end of I didn't contradict him. I heard everything he had to say. I'm not here to fight with people. I wasn't. I was a historian from my perspective. At the end of it, I said, well, I've actually been told by Ken Urquhart, who since has said he didn't tell me this, but that he'd overheard Ron Hubbard asking Mary Sue Hubbard, how are the break-ins in Washington going? So with David Mayo, he told me a story that I couldn't make any sense of. He said in 1968, when OT3 was released, he was sent from the Sea Org with Captain Bill Robertson, to Edinburgh to start the Hubbard Association of Personal Integrity, or HAPPY, in Edinburgh. And this is where OT3 was first released. You can find an astonishing account of it in Robert Kaufman's book, Inside Scientology, or How I Became Superman.
You mean AO Edinburgh, right?
It was called HAPPY, but yes, it was the first advanced organization. Yeah. It wasn't very happy. It was very unhappy. A man called James Stewart ended up jumping out of a hotel window as a consequence of his treatment there. He was an epileptic and he was ordered not to have any more fits. And I'm afraid he didn't have control over that. So Captain Bill himself told me that he'd forced him as a punishment to crawl across a slate roof, and they're very steeply pitched, 3 stories high in the rain, a slippery, and Kaufman cracked. Not Kaufman, Stewart cracked and killed himself. And so Scientology, of course, then tidied up the room before the police were told. And the media were told, oh, he was just a beginner. He'd not had much to do with Scientology. He was the head of the Durban organization. He'd been in Scientology for years. So they're liars, but sanity, honesty is sanity. Let's remember that Ron Hubbard said honesty is sanity here. And you can tell as many shore stories as you want if it protects Ron from prosecution. So David told me that as soon as he opened the OT3 pack, he realized that Hubbard was mad. This is 1968. And from then on, his whole concern was to get people out of Scientology. And he told me that he'd got 2,000 people out. I didn't know what to say, because I remembered in 1986 pleading with him to stop selling OT3 to people.
Yeah, that really doesn't make sense, because when he started his or maybe he had to run his independent AAC or whatever for a few years and give people the impression that he's actually delivering the tech, so then more people want to leave, and then he can change. Because if he straight away started squirreling, then people wouldn't leave the church.
No, I think David was the most honorable and ethical man. And I think that what we're looking at is what's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. This is a psychological mechanism which is well recorded, that one of the examples is what's called the Challenger study. When the Challenger blew up and meant that L. Ron Hubbard didn't make the front page of the newspapers because his death wasn't announced in time, there was a professor who sat his students down and had them write down, where they were and what they thought at the time that it happened. And I think 2 years later, he asked them to come back and write the account again. And I think only 1 in 10 of them wrote the same account, 90% of them. And the famous one is the guy who looked at his own handwritten account from 2 years before and said, that's my handwriting, but that's not what happened. Now, that is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And it is seen again and again that if you take contemporary records, something that a person wrote at the time, and you come back 10 or 15 years later, their account of it will be different. That's normal. Hubbard says it too. He says that when you have become clear, you'll forget what it was like not to be clear. And David, as I say, I think he was the most honorable of men, but he couldn't believe that he did believe. And maybe, we'll come back and have an interview in 10 years' time, and we'll see how much you remember of what we said tonight. Well, we talked about Walt Disney, I think, didn't we? And the influence he had upon people's minds through OT3. So David told me this thing that he never believed OT3. He then talked about all that was left after his work with Sarge Gabodi was traumatic incident reduction. And he told me that the more he'd looked into that and the more he'd done it, and I don't think anybody did more of it than David, the more he came to realize that it couldn't possibly work. And that people weren't really getting better. They were just getting addicted. Just as Freud had said when he originally denounced the Dianetic technique in, 1911, I think it was, when he explained that it doesn't help people reduce the transference. It doesn't help people become less dependent. It does the opposite. And this is certainly, I'm pretty sure, what Hubbard read that gave him Dianetics. This one lecture where Yusuf Breuer's technique of going back into the memory is used. And he went, oh, makes people more dependent. That's a good idea. And it does. People make no progress whatsoever. Their marriages fall apart. They stop talking to their children. They go bankrupt. They betray their friends in knowledge reports. They do all sorts of hideous, unethical things because they are grasping for that sense of the win, being in the win, the euphoria, the high of the very good indicators, just like any junkie. And so, the forgettingness curve, people change their stories. And David, while I cannot believe what he said about OT3 and, trying to get people out of Scientology, that just doesn't make any sense to me. I do believe he was honorable. And I did study his life in some detail to create an account of Scientology. And he came to the sincere belief that Scientology was not helpful in any way. In fact, quite the opposite. It's a way of enslaving people. He
really came to that belief. He really renounced the tech.
Yes, completely.
Yeah, I think that makes sense if you look at how he just sort of stopped talking about Scientology and got into the psychology stuff. And then I remember when he passed away, looking at his website and stuff like that, and it didn't even mention Scientology. It almost was like he said, no, I'm separating from this. I'm not going to be involved with it. Yeah,
and he was trying to develop something else. He was trying to find some other way of helping people. But I think there's one clue that and I get into conversations. I know a lot of counselors, and I don't have a particularly high regard for any system of counseling. I think Freudian analysis is a complete nonsense. I think Jung is a complete nonsense. Reich, complete nonsense. And then there are things like Carl Rogers' work, which is sometimes helpful. Aaron Beck's work with cognitive therapy is an interesting idea and can be helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy, so on and so forth. I've looked at so many forms, and I've spoken with so many therapists, and several of my close friends are fully qualified counselors, and that's what they do. And they tend to agree with me that there's such a thing as a therapeutic personality. With some people, it doesn't matter what they do, you'll feel better. With other people, they'll apply a technique and it won't work. So it doesn't tremendously matter what your approach is, as long as it's considerate. You can get a change in a person by listening to them, by paying attention to them, by caring about them. And it's that caring part, the empathetic part, which is so weirdly not there in Scientology. I can remember first being shown TRs and going, how is staring at somebody going to make them feel more at ease? So the kind of wooden, how does that help somebody relax? It's taught to the police and to the military as a way of controlling a person. It's called the predator stare.
Really? What's this?
Oh, if you're in an aggressive situation, you're a police officer or in the military, and it's taught throughout the world, you make locked on eye contact with the person, and you'll see it's exactly what a tiger or a leopard or a wolf will do with the prey that they're going to, my cat does it. They'll lock on eye contact with the animal that they're going to eat. It's a predatory thing. And I tell you, that was the worst thing for me. It took me 6 months to stop staring at people after I left. It was become such a habit after 9 years. And you talk to people afterwards and they say how intimidating it was, non-Scientologists, having somebody, with a wooden face.
And the you can sometimes get obsessed with the acting and stuff like that. It can sort of mess a little bit with your natural ability to communicate, because you're taking people who are like, you could just tell them, you know, here, take the person and audit them, and they could probably sit there and naturally read it out and be fine. But then you're telling them, no, this is how you communicate, and you got to pass this test from the soup and stuff. And then the person becomes fake, and they actually totally wrecks their TRs, or, you know, their ability to communicate, and they can go into a session and they're suddenly robotic, and they wouldn't have been like that if they hadn't done all that stupid, you know, checking out by the soup and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, my favorite is the listing and nulling, where you've got to make a question go up at the end, which in fact is not naturally how we ask questions.
Yeah,
it's an imposed thing. And you've got Hubbard. When you listen to Hubbard's auditing sessions, you know, things like the double acknowledgement, Hubbard would go, good, fine, I got that. And then he writes the thing, but you mustn't do that. And in fact, John McMaster said this to me, that Hubbard was the worst auditor.
I heard from some guy called George Green or something like that. He tried Dianetics, I think, in the 50s. And this was when I was still involved with the church. And I heard him talking about how he tried it. And he goes, yeah, I tried it, and Hubbard ordered me, and it was really crap. And then someone else came in and fixed me up, and it was good. And back then, you just don't know how to comprehend these sorts of things. You're just like, what? But like, because you think you're some sort of expert, but then you find out how he researched Dianetics and how he changed the technique for Dianetics in the last minute, and how he doesn't sort of follow his own policies. And you're like, okay. So I've got a question. Did Mayo say Hubbard created the OT8 doc when on sedatives?
No.
So that would be the OT3 doc, right?
OT3, Virginia Downsborough. I interviewed her twice, and she was his most trusted assistant in 1966. And he sent a telegram, I believe, desperately pleading with her to come and help him. She arrived in Gran Canaria, and I've been, you know, I went on holiday there, and I'd forgotten that this is where OT3 came from. It was, wow, what a memorable time, you know. Wow, I'm on the island where OT3 was developed. How fantastic. It's where Christopher Columbus stayed as well, on his way to go and screw over the poor Caribbean people, who were exterminated, of course, by Columbus and his followers. The Carib people, they no longer exist. But anyway, among Gran Canaria, and visit, you know, the shrine of OT3, there is no blue plaque or anything to say this is where OT3 was developed. You know, wow. She arrived there, and she told me, and I said this the other day when we talked, that he was out of his mind. He was going crazy. The body thetans had taken over, you know, and he couldn't eat anymore, and he was dehydrated, and he just had a shelf load of drugs. And when I talked, she would not tell me what was on that shelf.
Had he broken his back? Sorry, is this where he'd broken his back or something? Or he said,
well, the story I have is he got drunk one night and fell over.
Really?
Yep.
Someone said that.
Yep.
Who said that?
I think it was Jerry Armstrong said there was a letter in the archives, because there were letters from Hubbard to Mary Sue. And in one of them, he talks about taking pinks and greys as their pills he's taking, pinks and greys. Don't know what they were. But I think you know, it's a long time ago. I talked with Jerry about this, I don't know, about 84 when we had a conversation about it. But I think it was him who said that Hubbard had fallen down one night when he was drunk and hurt his back. So that became a broken back, just as his falling down a ship's ladder, which is what he says in an interview in December 1950 to Look magazine. Falling down a ship's ladder became crippled and blinded, you know, war wounds. Fell down a ladder. Doesn't sound as good, does it?
Yeah.
Of course, there's a story he told about being on the Edsel, the first ship to go down first, and that he was hit by a machine gun bullet. And he managed to row to Australia. Now, I charted this because Paulette Cooper actually gives this as a true story, because she didn't check it. And Paulette's brilliant. She really did an amazing job. But this one thing she didn't check. I found out where the Edsel went down, and it's over 700 miles from the Australian coast. So he rode it with a machine gun. You know, machine gun bullet wound is not a little thing. In his back, he rode 700 miles. Superman, nothing. Why he didn't fly there, I don't know, but you know.
So I know that Virginia was saying that Hubbard was on drugs, but why was Mayo saying that? Do you know if Mayo said that?
Mayo said it to me. He said when I brought this up, because it's long been a question with me what those drugs might have been. Though drugs are pretty simple, you've got uppers, downers, opiates. There aren't that many categories of drug really that will have a psychic effect. And Mayo said he knew what they were, that Virginia had told him what they all were. And I said, please tell me what they are. And I kept writing to him, but I never got an answer.
Would he not? He wouldn't say because he was still a believer and it was out PR?
No, I think he didn't have the list in front of him and he was busy doing other things. It
would be
matter.
easy to quickly say. I mean, that's an important thing.
I don't think he remembered. I think it was something that Virginia had told him before she died because she thought it was important. And he didn't think it was important. And so also he was not very well. He was, you know, heading towards his own demise at this time. And yeah, I think he wanted to talk with me to finish his business somehow, that because, you know, I've come to be seen as the historian of this subject. People sometimes think they'd better tell me, you know, when Nib's family came to me and said, here's the manuscript that Dad wrote, and nobody's seen it. Will you promise not to share it with anybody? And I went, yeah. So I got a copy of The Telling of Me by Me, which, as I said when we talked before, is a remarkable piece of work.
Wow, The Telling of Me by Me. So that's by Nibs.
Yep. It's his final statement about his involvement with Scientology and his father. I mean, there's got to be something bad about the idea that every time that Nibs went to the door, he had a gun behind his back because he knew what his father wanted to do to him. His own father wanted him dead.
You would have thought he would be able to handle him with communication.
You would. More communication, not less, is the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Disconnection.
Okay, what about this then?
Yep.
Did LRH direct Mayo to write knots, not as he actually ordered LRH, but a different version which was in agreement with his OT3? And then Scott Gordon asks, get him to clarify all you can what the deal was that David Mayo told him how Hubbard had changed everything they ordered it to fit Knott's OT3 case, even though what they actually handled was misconceptions.
Right. Well, what David told me in 1986 when I interviewed him, I did a formal interview with him. I talked with him a lot, but I did a 3-hour formal interview. He told me that Hubbard had his typical annual bronchial pneumonia. You smoke 100 cigarettes a day, that's going to happen to you. It's not body thetans. There's no big science involved there. And they were, 100 unfiltered cools, or later on picoons, which were handmade in New Orleans, because cools weren't strong enough. 100 a day. And chain smoking, there'd be a messenger with a lighter, ready with the next one. This one went in the ashtray to the messenger on that side, and the other messenger gave him the next one. So he was breathing smoke all the time, all day long. I even complained that he wished he could quit. The father of Narconon. Oh dear. What happened was he had bronchial pneumonia. Of course, 1965, the clearing course was bronchial pneumonia. 1966, OT3 was bronchial pneumonia. They cured it. He hadn't quite got the idea yet that often these conditions will lift of their own, so it's like the mistake, you've got a cold, you take vitamin C, the cold goes away. Well, if you've got an identical twin who's got a cold at the same time, you could do a study and you probably find that the cold went away at the same time. In fact, the research on vitamin C suggests that it's not really efficacious in getting rid of colds, but that's another matter altogether. A little bit of zinc might be, who knows? It might help you not catch it in the first place too. But he's got bronchial pneumonia. It's what, 77, I think. And David is now the senior CS, so he gets called in to do what poor Otto Roast had to do when Hubbard was ill, in 70, 71, whenever it was, and the 200 rock slams were found. And he decides that it's about misownership, and he audits Hubbard. He's in his sick bed, and Hubbard gradually gets better, and he attributes this to Mayo's fantastic auditing. And then when he can sit up, these sessions happen where Mayo is auditing misownership, misconception that you believe something to be true without having properly inspected it, which is not a bad idea. That there are ideas we have that we haven't checked the evidence for, like Scientology, for example, that when Hubbard made claims, people didn't tend to actually check them out properly. He certainly didn't. So Mayo's pulling these things that Hubbard has believed that are not his own beliefs and that are not things that have evidence behind them. And Hubbard's getting better. And then Hubbard starts doing this thing where he'll say, and this isn't the first time this happened, this had been happening from the beginning. He would stop the session, say, write this down, and dictate a bulletin. So you get the Thetan hand bulletin about, you're going to go off into this weird wonderland. And these things were dictated. When I saw the Knots pack, and I'd seen it before I met David Mayo, because I saw the ones they took from Copenhagen. In fact, I think the one in the Swedish Parliament has my handwriting on it. This used to happen a lot, that I'd get documents that'd be sent to me and I go, oh, this is interesting. And then I'd go, that's my handwriting, because so many documents had flown through. I'm in the unusual position that I've seen both the original Knots pack and the revision of Knots pack. I think there are 58, it's either 54 or 58 bulletins. I've read the whole thing.
So between when you did it in 77 and then when you came across the data after you'd left,
I did it in 82.
82, and then after that there was a revision that went on that you noticed.
When Mayo was declared suppressive, the idea was put forward that the reason that OT5, neurodynetics for OTs, hadn't worked, and they didn't give us our money back, but the reason it hadn't worked was because David Mayo had altered the materials. And it was a unique situation. I saw both packs because in Denmark, they handed them both over to Ron Lawley and Morag Belmain when they went into the organization. So I saw them both. There were 6 bulletins that were different. And the only difference between them, the only thing that had been amended, was that the name David Mayo had been taken from the bottom of the bulletin and the name L. Ron Hubbard had been put on. So that purified the material, so they now worked.
Okay, sorry, I was just getting a little bit confused. So yeah, Mayo's stuff and not solo knots is like around OT5 and it's different to OT3. And so that they revised it and they got rid of the connection between Mayo after he'd been declared and stuff.
But the only revision is the name on the bulletin. That the 6 bulletins and all of the other bulletins were signed L. Ron Hubbard, dictated by Hubbard. And what Mayo said to me was that he wasn't really interested in body thetans, that what he did with Hubbard to help him recover was about misconception, misownership, and that was pushed aside by Hubbard as he created the material out of nowhere with no research whatsoever.
Well, hold on a second. Then how does David Mayo claim that he invented knots then if Hubbard really kind of invented it? Like, obviously he was inspired by Mayo, but he's changed it. He's changed what Mayo was doing to what he wanted.
It's a question that we're going to need that Ouija board for again, because I don't know the answer to it. That I felt I was in a catch-22 situation that I couldn't publicly say what Mayo had told me. Because he was being sued by Scientology. I'd been involved in recovering nearly $3 million in court costs from Scientology for David Mayo, for his lawyers in LA. And yeah, there I am in the middle with this situation where there's no way I'm going to sell David Mayo out to Scientology. There's also no way I'm going to defend him. And so I'm not a Scientologist. I don't believe in it. I don't want these people to be able to crucify David Mayo. But David Mayo originated what would become OT5, but he was not the author of the materials, save for 6 bulletins.
But in court, though, was declared he was the author. Is that what happened?
The argument was that he said he had developed OT5, neurodynetics for OT, and the Church of Scientology in response said that it was work for hire, and as an employee of Scientology, he had no rights over the materials. That case, I don't think, was ever properly finalized.
So do you think that Mayo came up with the idea while he was trying to save Hubbard of running Dianetics on OTs or whatever, and then Hubbard was like, oh yeah, this is good, and latched onto it and added his like entity stuff to it?
What Mayo came up with, which is fundamental, is that you couldn't run Dianetics on OTs. Until then, expanded Dianetics had been run on OTs. And what Mayo was saying was that part of the problem that Hubbard was suffering from was that he'd had so much expanded Dianetics, and this had messed him up. So as is so often the case with Scientology, it's you need to do the folder error summary and undo the mess you've already made.
Oh, so NOTS is not expanded Dianetics. It's like it's
no,
NED.
it's not a Dianetic. It's not a Dianetic form at all.
Oh, I thought NOTS was NED for OTs. I thought that's what it's standard for.
It's called that, but there's no Dianetic procedure involved in it.
Whoa, hold on a second. This is freaking wild. Why would it be called NOTS then?
Because L. Ron Hubbard had a strange sense of humor. I'm not really sure. What you're doing is you're taking the body thetans. See, what's being said is you can't run Dianetics on the being, the thetan, the OT. You're taking the body thetans and you're, going through a process with them, which could be compared to Dianetics, but it's more sort of you identify a body thetan and away it goes. There's no proof at the beginning of the incident. Tell me.
Oh, so you're not. I thought they were running entities through incidents and stuff. I thought they were like, it was like doing Dianetics, but for an entity.
Well, get hold of the pack and work it from there. I don't want to get into a conversation about it because it's so long since I read the pack and so long since I did it. But and it's nonsense. I don't want to find myself in the middle of a situation there. But the heart of it was that what had messed Hubbard up was having expanded Dianetics.
Okay, personally for him, for his first dynamic.
And he had misowned incidents and beliefs that belonged to his body thetans. So, we wander off into a place. It's difficult for me because body thetans are a complete nonsense. Dianetics doesn't work. And, oh dear. Yes, next question. Rapid fire questions.
Okay, so we'll just finish up. So NED for OTs, it is NED, but it's not for the first dynamic. It's for the entities and stuff. And it's not even like you're not even actually going into incidents. You're just communicating with entities and telling them to go away.
Pretty much that once you've identified that a particular attitude, emotion, sensation, or pain, if I remember my list. It's a long time since I did this. It's 40 years, very nearly. But you identify that attitude, emotion, sensation, or pain. There is a strange side comment about this. There's a man called Eugene Gendlin, I think it was, who was a professor at Chicago University. And he became Carl Rogers' protege. Rogers was the founder of what's called third force therapy or humanistic psychology. Very important, client-centered, person-centered therapy. Still practiced now. And Gendlin actually defected once Rogers had died. And he brought out a technique, I think the same year, 78, that New Era Dianetics for OTs, which was not OT5 yet by this time. When it was first released, this book came out called Focusing. And you basically found locations within your body and you communicated with them. And I can't remember how I got this book. It was shortly after I left. And it wasn't because anybody thought it was anything to do with Scientology. And I was aghast because you got pretty much the same procedure, only there was no presumption that there was a body thetan. It was just that there was some area in your body that something traumatic had got locked up, some attitude, emotion, sensation, or pain. And you addressed it and you communicated with it. And it was so similar, it was eerie, you know, that a straight line psychological technique developed at Chicago University ran in parallel to knots and was probably a much safer and better way of doing it.
And what year was this invented?
78, I think, is when the book comes out.
And when did
Neurodynetics first comes out in 78, and it will be adopted, I think, in 1981. It replaces the old OT5.
Do you think Hubbard might have come across this material or something? Or?
No, I don't.
Okay. And it was sort of Mayo who inspired Hubbard to come up with this idea anyway, was it?
Yes, I'm pretty sure that it is from Mayo's work, but Hubbard was a squirrel. I hate to say this. Yes,
Really?
He was an absolute squirrel. All of the techniques of Scientology are taken from somewhere else and then squirreled, changed. We talked about altruising in our last conversation, and that's what happened, that he would take an existing technique and squirrel it. And you do know the origin of the word squirrel in Scientology? Do you know why the word's used?
Because the squirrel's in a little cage and it's just running around in circles, not getting anywhere.
Yeah, and the squirrel cages, I don't know what you call them in Australia. We call them hamster wheels. But if you put a hamster in a little wheel, it goes round and round and gets nowhere. You are the first Scientologist I've met who was able to define that. I'm not saying there aren't others who can, but it's a misunderstood word. Just like the word Cupid. Is it Cupid? No, not Cupid. Cherub. The word cherub in OT3, I've never yet met a Scientologist who could define the word cherub. They all think it's a little baby. Cherub blows a horn in incident 1.
What is it?
It's a great big angel. The cherubim and seraphim, if you look them up in the dictionary, are mentioned in the Old Testament. And in painting, this word came to be used for what are called putti in Italian, little babies in paintings that float around in the sky. But so that's why OT3 is not working. People have a misunderstood word on it.
Yeah, but why aren't people looking up the word cherub when they're in the course room and finding out the correct definition?
Because they think they know. Oh,
okay. So they think they know the meaning of the word and they're not getting it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my tip for anybody that, OT3 didn't work for. You need to look up the word cherub. I'm sorry. My jest. You're looking up, aren't you? You can't help yourself.
Because the problem is that I remember, I think, looking it up, and I came up with the first definition, the wrong definition, and now I'm typing it in, and your one's coming up, and I'm like, why when I looked up this word cherub, because I had no idea what cherub meant, or unless, but isn't a cherub like a cart or something? Is that right? Or like a cherub, pushed by horses or something?
You're thinking of chariots, maybe?
Yeah, chariot. Yeah, I don't know why. Maybe I looked up a bad dictionary, but I got the I don't know.
Oh, it's got a slang expression. It's been around for a long time to mean little baby, but it seems more logical that it would be an angel, doesn't it, blowing a big trumpet, because we're talking about something quite biblical. Let's see what the Oxford Dictionary has to say, so we don't have to cherubim. See cherub. Cherub. Don't know what that means. The seat of the deity. So the throne, the proper name of an angel, an order of angels, one of the living creatures mentioned in the Old Testament, or OT, and figured in the Jewish temple, one of the second order of angels excelling specially in knowledge, a conventional representation of such a being. In early Christian art, they were colored red. In modern art, a cherub is represented as a beautiful winged child or child's head. So there you go. Clearing all the misunderstood, that's blown off all of the misunderstandings that people have ever had, and they now have a full education. I never understood that. How come by clearing a word that you misunderstood 10 years ago, are you going to understand the stuff that came afterwards? That doesn't make any sense. You're not, because you have to go back and study all of it again. I'm sorry, it's just wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so quickly mention Avatar, or maybe I shouldn't even ask you. Can you answer that one quickly? I'm not that interested, but you had something interesting to say about Avatar.
I was in the. They're still around, and apparently they're quite a problem in Holland at the moment. They're getting into the educational system, I'm told. What's his name? Harry Palmer, was it? Harry Palmer was the mission holder at Elmira in New York. And he took his mission out of Scientology and was an independent. And then he started to announce that he had a new technology and that you could do this one course, the master's course. It would cost $500 and you would have finished the bridge. You wouldn't need anything more. And some of his staff members went to one of the local newspapers and complained about him. And it was alleged that it was threatened that their ethics folders would be made public if they kept talking. I was talking with a woman called Deborah Baker in Los Angeles, and she said that she had been threatened by Harry Palmer. And it seemed when the master's course failed, and a number of people I knew did it and went, yeah, so what? When that didn't crack their cases, the wizard course came out. And for $500, this would get you to the end of the bridge. And so it's continued. And they've morphed into a kind of hippie sort of version of Scientology.
It is, yeah. So I tried the first start of it, and it's more like a sort of more feminine, more hippie, Buddhist type of like Scientology.
Yeah, I mean, there've been the Enlightenment Intensive was another fascinating offshoot. Chuck Berner, co-counselling, which is being readopted. The Open University here, which is the largest university in the world, because it's it doesn't have a campus. You can apply from wherever. And they used co-counselling. And Harvey Jackins, who founded co-counselling, said it got nothing to do with Hubbard. So I found a picture of Jackins receiving a certificate from Ron Hubbard and shaking his hand, which suggested that it might have something to do with it. And nobody would. I tried to get the Open University to look at this because co-counselling is Dianetics. It's Book 1 Dianetics.
Is that what it is? Co-counselling. It's just it's just like what, the twinning system or something.
Yeah, reevaluation, co-counselling. Then Jackins there were allegations of sexual abuse made against him, and co-counselling went out of fashion. It's coming back again. It's on its way back. But we tracked 200 splinter groups from Scientology in all. Yeah. Some of them very direct, like co-counselling. Some of them like Landmark, Forum, Est, or whatever we're going to call it, which had some influence. The most worrying one is definitely Nexium. And for the last 3 years, I've been asking people who are involved in Nexium to show me its materials.
Yeah, what tech do they have? What is it?
Well, they have these things which they call EMs, or explorations of meaning, which are kind of like finding an incident and earlier similar. But they talk about their opponents as suppressives, and that's unique to Scientology otherwise. They talk about being at cause. And in going through their material, they use quite a lot of words. It's a mixture, it would seem, of neuro-linguistic programming, which can be incredibly dangerous. Maybe Siddha Yoga, or one of the Western yoga forms, and Scientology. And in fact, watching Keith Raniere in the documentary The Vow, he complains that somebody has accused him of brainwashing people the way Scientology do. But they're infamous because he had women, a brand of his initials put on their pubic mound with a cauterizing iron, like a soldering iron, lasting 30 minutes to 45 minutes to burn the flesh to brand his initials into it. And that is, you know, he's now doing 120 years in prison. I don't think it's long enough, personally. I think locking him in a mountain for 75 million years for electronic trap would be much better.
Yeah, we need a theta trap for him. He needs his Satan locked up. I tried like the beginning little thingos of Avatar, and there was a guy there who had been around for years, and he'd obviously hadn't had his problem handled because he still clearly had anxiety. I could sort of tell, like he was the anxiety person or whatever. And I think I could tell he was pissed off with me because he was like, this guy's new to freaking all this Avatar. And he probably, maybe he didn't know I was a Scientologist and how I could pick it up quickly. And anyway, I could see he was annoyed, but I could see how he was towards the higher levels. And then to qualify for things, he has to volunteer. And then also, because his anxiety wasn't handled, he was redoing a beginning step. And so he, even though he was at this higher level, he was going back to the start. Kind of like you can imagine an OT3 or something like that, sitting in a book one Dynetics course with a new person there. And but I could just see how it wasn't it's not handling the right why. You know, it's the wrong target. You know, it's like he can do as much talk therapy and talking about, I don't know, what his meaning of his life is or what he wants to achieve. He can keep on doing these sorts of things, but it's like you got to find whatever is causing the actual problem and handle it.
And you know, I mean, in therapy terms, as I say, you know, I've had 37 years to look at therapeutic systems, and largely because when people leave Scientology, they're often traumatized, particularly Sea Organization members. You know, they've been led to believe that it's their fault that things have gone wrong. They're then given a freeloader bill, having worked as slaves for a 90-hour week for however long. They're told they've got to pay $1,000. They're made wrong. I think that's the Scientology expression that fits the bill. And so, and they've often lost family. They've lost friends because they've dared to complain. And so now, you know, their whole social circle has disintegrated. They no longer have a job. A friend of mine was 10 years in the Sea Organization, and he was an L. Ron Hubbard communicator. So when he left, he thought, well, you know, I've been in a senior executive position. And he went looking for a job. And the only job he could get was as a builder's laborer. He wasn't actually qualified despite all of these courses. You know, when you told people, I've done the Flag Executive Briefing course, they went, yeah, really? You know, here's a nail, knock it into that piece of wood. And so you're really let down. And your whole thing of, you know, you're clearing the planet one day, and the next day you're trying to find enough money to buy a bag of potatoes in the supermarket. So I've seen a lot of traumatized people, and some of them will end up going to a counselor, doing whatever form. And in my experience, usually that will be harmful, because the counselor won't realize that you have to, first of all, take away the cultic shell. You have to get through the identity of the Scientologist to get to the person who's underneath that. Because, want to get into this? A normal human being is a series of identities that are based upon who you are communicating with and what mood you are in. If you said one, the x-axis is how you feel. If you're, you know, on the tone scale, whatever, if you're angry or anxious, you will approach things you'll communicate in a different way. But also if you're talking to your mum or your dog or your boss or your child, you'll talk in a different way. Even to the extent of, you know, if you're talking to a baby, there's a language called motherese by linguists, you know, that, oh, what a pretty little baby. You know, people will, their tone of voice, everything will change. All of these things are identities that change and group together and form a personality. They form the person. What happens in any authoritarian group is that there's an ideal identity that is then implanted. In Scientology, you are meant to be enthusiastic. You're not meant to show lower tone levels, even though in Dianetics, Hubbard says you should have the proper tone reaction to things, the appropriate one, but you're meant to be enthusiastic. In Harvey Jakes, when he was the commanding officer at Manchester Organization, told the staff that they were not smiling enough. Isn't that a great one? You know, you've got to pretend. And of course, that pretense becomes very severe with SEAL members because they've only got one pair of socks. They only get an hour off a week. They eat rice and beans, and they have to pretend to the public that this is the most fantastic thing in the world and they are the elite, the leaders of humanity. It's all a show. It's all a sham. Now, if you don't get through that and you go to a counselor, let me give you a simple example of this. My way of undoing Scientology in people, it doesn't take thousands of hours of auditing or frauditing, as Captain Bill called it. You take one principle. Once you can absolutely see that something in Scientology does not make sense, then you can start challenging the rest. Now, you've gone a certain way along this path, but let's take the 8 dynamics. I sat down in a room with 11 other former members long ago. One of them was, of course, whenever 2 people are gathered together in the name of Scientology, one of them will be working for OSA. And one of them was, in fact, reporting back to a guy who called himself Charlie Poulter, who was a spy for Scientology. But that didn't matter. 12 people in the room. And I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go around the circle, person to my left, all the way around. Between us, we had over 200 years of experience of Scientology. And what we're going to do is everybody in the room is going to say a time when they use the 8 dynamics to solve a problem. Now, I was just starting the conversation with that. And I was a bit shocked because every person in that room, not one of them could think of a time they'd ever solved a problem by weighing something up on the 8 dynamics. What is it good for the first dynamic, good for the second dynamic, all of that. That quite surprised me. But that was just foreplay. The actual event was saying, well, let's look at it this way. The greatest good for the dynamics. So that means if it's good for me, that's 1 vote. If it's good for my family, that's another vote. If it's good for my cricket club, you're an Australian, you understand the passion for cricket, then that's 1 vote. If it's good for mankind, and we're now up to 7.25 billion people, that's 1 vote. If it's good for all the rocks, that's 1 vote. If it's good for the other living entities, that's 1 vote. If it's good for the spirits, that's 1 vote. And if it's good for God, that's 1 vote. What? If you believe in God, you can forget the other 7 votes because you need to do God's will. So that's not going to work. And how infinity might get a vote, I don't know. The point is that something that is good for me, 1 vote, something that's good for 7.25 billion people, 1 vote, this mathematically is not going to work. This is bullshit. This is absolute bullshit. It's not a way of solving any problem or determining anything. Once you can challenge that, let's look at another one. Affinity, reality, and communication equal understanding. If you raise any corner of the triangle, you will raise the others. Yep. The angles will stay the same. So if you raise communication, affinity will always go up. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think that's right.
Well, Hubbard did say bullets are communication too. So by this logic, shooting somebody will make them love you.
I mean, there's certain people you can raise communication and then you realize that there's a disagreement on reality and then it can drop the communication off and stuff like that. But the ARC thing, it seems like sort of mystical, like the triangle and like people who are new to these things, they look into it, go understanding, what's understanding, and you look up a dictionary, what's communication and reality and what's that, and it's and you spend all this time on this mystical little thing. It's like this stupid puzzle that, I mean, if there's anything in Scientology to get rid of, I reckon it would be the ARC idea. I just think it's stupid. The whole thing. The only thing I got from that was that if you meet somebody and you don't have anything to say to them, just find something that they might agree with and then talk to them about that.
And look at the way that there's a little slide of meaning. Reality is agreement. Reality is agreement. The universe exists because we agree that it exists. I think when I close my eyes, it's still there. It doesn't need my agreement. And what about if 3/4 of the people agree that this is reality and the other quarter don't? Now, astonishingly enough, there's an L. Ron Hubbard story called One Was Stubborn, which anybody who's been in Scientology, there's another one which is about a nuclear physicist who develops a A Science of Mind, written in 1949.
Really?
Oh yes, but
Hubbard-
one was stubborn.
Hubbard's got
There's
a science
one guy.
fiction book about
It's a story, and offhand I don't remember the name of it. There's another one where he criticizes Christian Science for this idea that you can wish and things will happen, or postulates as we call them. And he laughs at it. He says this is a stupid idea, and then he sells it.
He is such a character.
L. Con Hubbard.
So with OT3, I was just thinking that a way to test out OT3 is that apparently you tell me you've done it. The person sits down and they run out the incident on the entities or whatever, right? Now, if you've got somebody in France and then somebody in England, right, and you say to them, what did you see while you were running out that entity? And if someone says, oh, I saw these guys walking around in purple t-shirts and long black sticks or something like that, and then someone in Australia says, oh, I saw these guys with purple t-shirts and long black sticks, like while they were mocking it up, if people came up with the same mock-up, that would actually help prove it's true. That would be an interesting way of testing OT3.
Yeah, let's give us a side route. When the Russian files became available in 1991, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, some researchers into UFOs went, wow, we can now get into these archives. And what was fascinating was that descriptions of aliens, the little green men, and alien spaceships are different in different parts of the world. So in America and Europe, where we're all communicating with each other since the first flying saucer was seen, and by the way, the term flying saucer, the guy who first used it, he was describing something. He said it was cigar shaped, but it flew like a saucer skimming over the water.
Are you sure he didn't? You sure he didn't say it would look like a saucer, like a little plate?
No.
You sure?
No, the first one in the account I've seen. I mean, it gets very confusing because there are drawings that were apparently made during the Second World War by German engineers, which are of what we think of as a flying saucer. But the accounts of what aliens look like in alien abductions in Russia and behind the Iron Curtain in the Warsaw Pact countries are different from the ones in the West. And I would suggest that if you ran a test on OT3, here's a simple one. I have a friend who was a very convinced Scientologist. He lasted 11 months in the mother cult. And because he was running processes from creation of human ability, they threw him out. But he still believed. And for years, he built up this image of a past life. And he started to make notes about what the town had looked like and where it had been. And eventually he took his wife, who didn't actually believe, with him, and nothing that he'd drawn was true. Now, you find me a Scientologist who lived in any other foreign country you like and get them to speak the language they spoke then.
Well, yeah,
fair enough, isn't it?
Yeah, or like try and get them to describe the town that they lived in and stuff like that.
But the language would be the simplest thing, that if you lived in medieval France, you'd be able to speak the language. If you'd really been there, you'd surely remember that, wouldn't you? You spoke it every day for however many years. If you were speaking Mandarin or Russian, why wouldn't you be able to, and it's nonsense.
If I'd done OT3, I would totally ask another person. I'll go, what were you actually seeing while you're running OT3? And if they're very wildly different things, if they're then it's like that's a definite way of testing it out. I reckon that would be a great way to test that and it might make people realize, I might just be making this all up. This might just be me sitting in a chair making this up.
Which is what OT8 says. OT8 says you were making it all up, that Hubbard got you to mock it all up, and now you've got to unmock it, and they're not going to give you the money back.
Really?
Really?
Well, like that's like the end.
That's the EP realizing that you mocked it all up.
Well, no, but wasn't it? I thought that it was that it was all entities or something, and it wasn't actually you running it. That's what I heard.
I must say that as yet I've not seen a leaked OT8 pack, so it's only accounts coming from people who've done it and have left, and most of them seem to be keeping very quiet about it.
But how do they come to? Is this the original version you're saying of OT8, or saying the current version?
I believe it's the current version that it's saying that basically you mocked up your whole case.
So you're telling me, so when you go, so he repeated the Dianetics EP, he repeated it again at OT8.
Yeah. He didn't have any new ideas, you know.
I find that interesting.
Yeah. So I've been told. I've not seen an OT8 pack. I've had one OT8 who gave me a description saying that he was a bit disappointed to find that he'd basically been told that all of his money had been wasted because the case was mocked up and he now had to undo all of, you know, what he'd been through. And that he didn't, you know, if you look to in 1974, L. Ron Hubbard withdrew the end phenomena from the OT levels, but the bridge, which was published in Scientology 0.8, has a definition for OT8, and that is at cause over physical and mental matter, energy, space, and time. And so OT8s should be able to make their body disappear, make a building emerge, blow up a planet, what have you. The whole goal that was always the goal from the first 1952 lectures in February 52, where he starts talking about these supernatural things. We're gods, we can do these things. And of course, the pathetic reality is that OT8s can't do anything. I'm still here. I wouldn't be if they could. You know, if they had any supernormal powers, they would have at least stopped me from talking by now.
Well, look at this. I looked into something, and apparently, it's the idea that Zeno is free or Zeno is not free. And Hubbard apparently said to Captain Bill, "I won't tell people that Zeno is free because it's too upsetting."
Yeah, you wouldn't want to upset people.
Huh?
True. You wouldn't want to upset people. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. And then apparently, yeah, I know. I mean, he just screams at his stuff like
throw them overboard. Yeah,
but but then apparently he said to Otto Roos, "Zeno's locked up at that volcano now." When they're on the ship somewhere. What? I mean, I imagine you're just going to say Hubbard is just full of it in lying. Just either way, he's just full of it. I mean, but I don't know. Does he actually believe in Zeno? Does he believe Zeno's locked up or not? I mean, what's the idea with him saying one thing and saying another?
Well, it's a problem that junkies have. That they can't remember what they said. Look at the handwritten bulletins about Zenu, and he can't even decide what his name is, whether it's Zenu or Zemu. Sometimes it has an N in it, sometimes it has an M in it.
But do you think that's also a little shifty reference to the Stan Lee comic? Because the Stan Lee comic's got Zemu. Do you think that's him putting a little hint in there as a smartass?
It's always possible because he did make childish, you know, like the arse lickers joke in the PDC. All of you spent lives as arse lickers, you know.
Like all along, he could have known that he's basing this on Zemu. So he goes, you know what, I'll say Zenu, and then I'll switch a month later and I'll say Zenu, and then it'll just confuse him. And someone who's switched on will pick up on it.
I just think he was, you know, I think he was a temporal lobe epileptic. I think he had very little. He had very poor memory, and you know, things changed from one day to another. If you look at the Mission into Time, you know, and they even produced that very embarrassing book, Mission into Time. I interviewed Hannah Eltringham, who was the captain at the time of the Mission into Time, and she was so sort of. We found some bottle tops. You know, he'd say, "Oh yes, if you look there, you'll find treasure." And it's like we found an empty tin can. They found absolutely nothing in the locations that he'd said, and yet he still managed to make a book about it claiming, that he'd used. And the same is true for any Scientologist. If they had these abilities, if they had this memory, and you don't have to get into OT3 at all, if people were genuinely remembering past lives, they'd be able to give evidence of it. There are cases outside of Scientology which are a lot more interesting. There's a psychiatrist called Arthur Gurdam in Bristol who wrote a wonderful book called We Are One Another. And he, as a psychiatrist, and he was a therapeutic psychiatrist, not working in a mental hospital, somebody came to him for therapy and claimed that they'd been a Cathar, an Albigensian, in the 13th century in the Languedoc, around Toulouse in France. What is now France, it wasn't then. And they were the first group to be exterminated by the Catholic Church. In the 13th century, they were exterminated genocidally. And this woman said, I was a Cathar. I have these marks on my back. And Gurdon went, oh, we got one here. What a nutcase. And she gave names like Raymond of Toulouse and various people from this time. And he thought not much of it. Then he had another patient who came along and who didn't know this woman and told him the same or very similar story. So he was kind of curious, and he went on holiday to the Languedoc, and he found a historian who was just opening the inquisitorial records. The first Inquisition, started by Innocent III, was at this period. And it was him who ordered the genocide of the Cathars, because they believed stupid things like that priests should be pure. They called their priests parfaits or perfects. They were vegetarians, in odd stuff like that. And they were nice to people, you can't have that. Not in Christianity, you're not meant to be nice to people. So he found the names of these people who'd been mentioned, and he believed that until these records were opened, they'd never been mentioned. Now, that's a pretty good series of proofs, and he later found other people. I'm still, I can see how he could have been conned. But nonetheless, at least that's an attempt to prove something. Scientology's never attempted it. No Scientology OT has said, I can speak the Mandarin dialect that was spoken in 1374 or what have you. Nothing has ever been offered. It's a fantasy. And people buy into fantasy,
I noticed there was something strange when there was lots of people who were apparently past life Scientologists. And they'd gone clear in the 50s or 60s. And I thought, this doesn't quite make sense, because there was no mass die-out of Scientologists in 1960, 1967, 1958. There was no, in the history books, there's no sudden mass die-out of Scientologists. So why, like, a lot of those people stayed on alive and stuff past that? So I was trying to look into the dates of it, and I was like, this is just strange. It would make sense if in 1963 there was some tragic event in St. Hill and all these sires died, and then you'll get all these people reincarnating and they were coming back in the 90s and the 2000s and stuff like that. But I always thought that was really odd. I'm just like, there's so many people who were like, yeah, I was a Scientologist and I went clear in my past life. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, which kind of clear? Do we mean a real clear, like John McMaster in 1965? What's more, can they tell you what they were called then, where they lived, what their wife was called, what their kids were called, what their mum and dad were called? Can they tell you details of the life they lived? No, they can't. The explanation you could give is that they're all L. Ron Hubbard's body thetans. And it may be that, in fact, all Scientologists are, in fact, just L. Ron Hubbard's body thetans. So if, all of the thousands of Scientologists who believe they were Napoleon, they were Napoleon's body thetans or something like that. But the point is that they should be able to tell you their name, their address, their families, and something of their history. I know my friend Nora Beth Crest, she, I think, was 14 when she attested to past life clear. And she said it was incredible because everybody was like, oh, wow, incredible. And she suddenly got status.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's too, if being a past life clear or something meant that you were unimportant and not cool, then so many less people would register on the e-meter that, oh, I'm past life clear.
How many people say, oh, it's a past life SP?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just doesn't come. Yeah. Do you mind having a quick break? Is that all right if I have a break?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to leave this recording because it's just easier.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. We're back.
Yay.
We come back.
Okay. Just neatening up the questions a little bit. There's
Okay.
a few that relate to Captain Bill.
Yep. There always will be.
Yeah.
Astropomagine.
Yeah.
Let me just see. I think I've got the. I think it's up here actually. Yeah, Captain Bill. This is the Sector Operations Book Bulletin, Sector 9. Sobs, sons of bitches.
You want to hold it up?
Yeah, it's the particular relevant page is actually this. And this came with the bulletins. It's written by, it's in Captain Bill's handwriting. And at the bottom, it's signed. Astar Parmegian, Captain, does it say, Love A Star, Captain W.B. Robertson, Love Astar, Captain Bill, Captain B.A. Robertson, or what have you. So this is his own handwriting where he is saying he is Astar, and Astar is Astar Parmegian, who's the signatory of several of the handwritten bulletins, and of course is the girlfriend of L. Ron El Rey in the Revolt in the Stars, the accounting of OT3.
So that's
So
where
Bill was.
That's where he got the name from, Astar. He didn't just get it. I thought he got it from some of his past life, like he in auditing session or something.
It's the name is actually given as one of the characters in Hubbard's script for Revolt in the Stars, and she's a nightclub singer.
Okay.
And that's who Captain Bill believed he had been.
Mm.
Aaron Hubbard's sexual partner 75 million years ago. That is a very long romance. Romeo and Juliet only managed a few weeks.
Well, didn't he say, he goes, I knew Hubbard for a long, long time.
Well, when I hosted the first public event of disillusioned Scientologists in East Grinstead on the 18th of October 1984, and David Gaiman came in, the former Deputy Guardian PR for many years, and he'd just come back from Gilman where he'd been digging ditches, literally, as one of the crims on the programme for the Guardian's office people. And he stood there going, go another mile with the church, remember Ampronistics. And I don't think there's anybody in the room who knew what Ampronistics was. It was a 1965 splinter group. And eventually Bill got tired of him saying, I've got to go soon, but, and he just kept on talking. And Bill came on the stage, and it's probably on the internet somewhere, which it shouldn't be because it's my copyright. I had it filmed.
But please post this. Please post this on the internet. This would be great to see.
Well, I think part of it is there somewhere, but I've got the originals of it, which I must have transferred from tape. But Bill came on the stage and he went, I have been with Ron for more than many centuries. And a friend of mine who's in the front row said she had a headache for a week afterwards from this violent shouting. But there you go. Yes, well, Captain Bill.
Yeah, now we're in the future. Some of the things from that book that he spoke about sort of hasn't come true. The sector ops bulletins. And
well, they could have done. They could have done. The Markabians may have taken over in 1986.
And there could be a free zone decree and stuff like that.
Gold prices may have crashed. We just didn't notice, No, it's nonsense.
So that's all literally delusion. That's full on just delusion. Right?
Hubbard was not on the mothership in 1982.
But are you sure? Are you sure
he was alive?
Are you sure he thought Hubbard was dead? Are you sure, or did he think spiritually he was just communicating with aliens?
Captain Bill, I think in the bulletins themselves, says that he's receiving telepathic messages from mothership reissue by order of Sector Commander L. Ron El Rey. So he is receiving these, and he told me he was receiving them telepathically. They're dated 1982, 28th of April, Sector Operations Bulletin number 2. He also, the guy he'd been staying with in Spain, he's with John Caban, who is an interesting character. But there was this, Mike somebody or other, I only met him then, he was great. But Bill had come to him and said, I know you were declared in the 60s, and so you're safe. You can't be tainted by the Markabians and the FBI and these people. Can I come and stay with you? And Mike went, yeah, okay. And he gave Bill a room, And Bill said, no, it's too big. The room's too big. Have you got anywhere smaller? He was like, no, it's the smallest room in the house. He said, have you got a cupboard? And Captain Bill, and Bill told me this himself. He went into this wardrobe and stayed in there because that was as much space as he could inhabit, and gradually came out. And this is when he started receiving these telepathic messages.
Why did he feel like the cupboard? He just felt safe in a small environment.
His level of havingness was greatly diminished.
Because he'd been kicked out of the church and he was so upset.
And so, but at the same time, he's receiving these messages from Ron on the mothership. At the same time, that Hubbard is very much still alive in Creston, California.
I took it as, when I read it, I took it as that Hubbard was exterior and was communicating with aliens and then communicating to Captain Bill.
Yeah, that's called intellectualization, where one rationalizes something to try and in Scientology you have to do an awful lot of it, you know.
But did Captain Bill actually say, no, Hubbard's dead? Hubbard's
he's left the body. He's dropped the body. Yeah,
he actually said that.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
He's an idiot then. He's just. I already knew it, but he's just wrong.
Yeah,
he's just wrong. We've got Hubbard singing the song and stuff, and we've got Mission Earth, and Mission Earth stuff in that relates to a James Bond movie. I watched this James Bond movie that came out in '83. And when I watched it, I was like, oh, my God, Hubbard got some ideas from this James Bond movie and put it into Mission Earth. And that was when I knew that he must have started writing Mission Earth in halfway through '83 or something. Because there's a character that's just like Sultan Griss. And then there's a character that's like blah, 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 blah. And I could just see how he watched this James Bond movie because he liked James Bond. He watched the movie and it inspired his idea for Mission Earth. I can totally tell. I can't say for sure, but it really seems likely because there's this James Bond movie with a dodgy intelligence officer that stuffs up, and he even kind of looks like the description of Sultan Griss, and it's actually played by Rowan Atkinson. So it's the James Bond where you see Rowan Atkinson, and is this anyway? But what about? If Hubbard had dementia, this is what I don't get. If Hubbard had dementia, how come he could write a book? And then sing those songs. It's just strange.
Well, I think only somebody with dementia could sing "Thank You for Listening." Let's be better about that. This is not Bing Crosby. On the point of whether he was alive or dead, when Chick Corea was challenged by one of my friends, who said to him, Hubbard's dead, he's gone. Chick said, no, he isn't. And he said, how do you know? Chick reached into his pocket and he said, because he sent me this cassette recording this week telling me what to do with Road to Freedom.
And what year was that?
That would have been '83. So it's after the Sector Operations bulletins.
Oh, in '83, he was working on the album. I thought the album was '85.
No, he's working on it. It's released in '85. Chick worked on it for 2 years. Okay. Waste of a great musician's life, But what are you going to do? And by the way, one of the Sector Operations bulletins, number 7, is signed L. Ron Hubbard, founder. So any confusion about who L. Ron Elray is, it's right there. So there we are. Astromedgian Deputy Sector Commander for L. Ron Elray, Sector Commander, Sector 9, Galactic Patrol. Thank you for listening. I write just for you.
Yeah, so I think it's strange because I've seen, old people with dementia. And I'm just like, these people can't write a huge book, like 10-volume book. It's just strange.
Vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, there are variants. And what appears to happen is that he was descending into psychosis. If you play music to people who have Alzheimer's that comes from when they were young, they can get up and dance. They can sing along with it. There is a part of the brain that doesn't seem to be affected. This is commonly observed. With vascular dementia, it would depend what parts of the brain were affected. So they're as with any psychosis, with schizophrenia, there'll be, it's a roller coaster. There'll be highs and lows. From the accounts of people around Hubbard and from what he was saying, I mean, Jesse Prince gave two astonishing talks at Getting Clear. I'm really pushing this because it's like $3 a session. He gave these two great talks. This is the head of all the technology at this time. So, it might be worth listening to. His book's quite interesting too. But he talks about Miscavige tried to get rid of him because the way Jesse got the job was that Hubbard suddenly said, right, who's the auditor who's got the best stats in the world? And it was Jesse in Chicago. And so Jesse suddenly finds himself, right, he's now the senior CS int. And he's in Chicago one day, and now he's the head of all Scientology technology. And he told a series of astonishing stories. But one of them was that Hubbard kept firing whoever was in charge of sending stats to him. And there'd be bankers' boxes full of stats, on paper stats from all the orgs in the world, 400 orgs or what have you, all going to him every week, because this is the amount of micro control. He wasn't actually in control of the organizations. I'd just like to point that out for tax purposes. But he was getting all this stuff sent to him, and he kept firing whoever they kept being RPF'd. And Miscavige thought, I know how I can get rid of Jesse, because he loathed Jesse. Jesse had been forced on him. And Jesse's a kind of street sharp Chicago guy. He is not your regular Scientologist. He's also tremendously funny. He's really, the talks he gave were great. But he gets given the job of being the man who will relay the stats to Hubbard. And he's going, oh dear, what am I going to do? Because all they're doing is signing a form and sending them in. And he goes, that's the mistake. I won't sign the form. So he just sends the stats without doing anything, and he gets a commendation because Hubbard says that Jesse had realized that the ink in the pen had rose perfume in it, and that the people before were attempting to control him. So he's basically batshit. He's all over the place and deteriorating from there. And that's the account that Serge Fouth gives of him. His cook at the time gives it. The people around him are saying, he's lost it, basically, which is typical. The guru of most cults goes into seclusion in the last years. The New Kadampa tradition, which is a dreadful, monstrous aberration of Tibetan Buddhism, their guru has been missing for several years. And you're going, well, the leadership have gone, oh, he's dead. What are we going to do now? And with Scientology, it was, how are we going to keep Hubbard away from the public? Because, he was an evil being and he had to hide, which is what Hubbard was doing for the last 10 years of his life, by the way. And he had to keep moving from places because a being has overts, has to keep leaving. No, it doesn't apply to Hubbard, does it? I'm sorry, of course. Scientology only applies to we lesser beings.
Did Jesse Prince say that Hubbard said that African Americans can't be cleared and should be killed?
I haven't heard him say that, but he did say that Hubbard decided he wanted to see him and see what he looked like. And he was sent into a parking lot and got to stand on a planter in this parking lot. And this limousine pulled by and the window came down and this straggly old guy looked out at him and he realized it was Ron Hubbard. And I think the next day he got a present. I think it was an assault rifle, but Hubbard hadn't realized that he was black. And apparently there was something of a look of shock on his face. And if you do look at Scientology, I only knew one person of African descent in the UK who was in Scientology. And of course, Hubbard was racist, what he said about Bantus and the things that he said in South Africa. They're just appalling, absolutely appalling.
How did you know Hubbard didn't know that he was black?
Oh, Jesse said that from the shock, that he'd never, it hadn't crossed Hubbard's mind that by asking for the guy with the best stats, he might get a black guy, There's nobody on the ship who was black, was there?
Mm.
I can't think of anybody.
Now, did Captain Bill say, if I told you or people just two things about Hubbard, then they will leave Scientology? I remember you told me that. Yeah.
Captain Bill said that there were two things that he had witnessed that would make anybody leave Scientology. They were so gross.
He had witnessed.
Yeah.
So
not things he knew, but things he'd seen Hubbard do.
I wonder.
Mm.
I wish that would have been so fascinating.
Well, when Captain Bill reincarnates, which he must have done by now, you can ask him.
It's because did he really say witness and saw?
Yes.
So that to me almost indicates something like maybe heavy drug use or like pedophilia or something like that.
A gross sexual practice or drug use. But I mean, Nev Chamberlain told me he'd seen Hubbard injecting something along the way. So yeah, I mean, Hubbard's behavior, I mean, for me, just the fits of rage would have been enough to go, I don't want to follow this person. He has not achieved.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, wow, this means something coming from Captain Bill. Hubbard really must have been doing something really outrageous. Really outrageous.
Bill worshipped him. Bill worshipped him. I mean, he sang songs to him every night, dressed up in a ball gown, you know. I wish I'd seen that. That would have been interesting, you know, but too late now.
That might be, no, Hubbard wasn't a cross-dresser. Aaron, do you know Aaron Saxton, right?
I don't know.
He was a New Zealander and he was involved with the church and he got up to higher levels and stuff, but like left around 2005 or something like that. And he was involved with the whole anonymous thing and protesting, and then the church silenced him. He cut some deal with them. But what he said is he saw a flag order. I think it's a flag order or a Sea Org order or something. It's not the common ones we see. And it was in the church, but it was hidden away in the Hollywood Guarantee building, I think. Yep. And he saw a document that said something about, and the problem is it's hard working out what exactly it said and what he thought it said, but it says something about like Jewish people being influenced by entities and bankers or something, and that Hubbard set up the Sea Org in order to do a Holocaust of the Jews or something. Now,
it's not very nice.
I know. I don't know. I don't know if he then extrapolated and said Hubbard is like, I don't know if Hubbard actually said let's do a Holocaust, or if he just read this entities being influenced, evil entities influencing the Jews and enslaving us or something, and then he extrapolated and implied that that's encouraging a Holocaust to be done or something. Anyway, I'd love to get to the bottom of exactly what this document was that he read, but he didn't seem like he was lying. He seemed like it was legit.
Yeah. And I mean, the point is that Hubbard, from fairly early on, everything he said was recorded. I talked with a guy called Ken Rose in, I think, 93. I was in LA. And he was the head of Ron's Technical Compilations, RTC. They had to change the name. He said there is so much material because everything was recorded. We'll never get through transcribing all of this stuff and trying to make sense of it. Indeed, the OT8 bulletin, the famous Lucifer bulletin, Nancy Meny was... she was going through it and saying, oh, well, Ron wrote this bit and Ron wrote this bit, but he didn't write this bit. And Jesse, I don't know if they're still together, but they were together at the time. And Jesse came in and looked at it and said, how do you know? Because you're right. Those are the bits he did write, and it's compiled. They're stuck together by, I can't remember his name, whoever was the senior CS at the time. And
Ray Midoff or something like that.
Yeah, Ray Mitoff. And Nancy said, I handled so many dispatches from Hubbard, I absolutely always recognize his style. So somebody's stuck these things together.
So hold on a second. Why? So that OT8 Truth Revealed document wasn't entirely written by Hubbard.
No, it's compiled from statements that he made.
But that's like a lot of the tech. A lot of the tech's compiled from stuff he
all
made.
of the tech.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just but the reason why I mean, I don't think that other people made that stuff up in that Truth Revealed document, because from start to end it all makes sense. From start to end it flows, and it sounds just like Hubbard.
Yeah, it's I think the reverence towards Hubbard. I think the only person who'd been willing, might be willing to change things, is David Miscavige, because, for example, the abortion rule, there's no way that Hubbard would have issued that. So once he'd got control, Miscavige has, let's say that he has second dynamic problems in, for example, where is Shelley? Why? Why doesn't David Miscavige have children? Is he impotent?
He's just got he seems to have a small second dynamic. We're getting into Donald Trump territory. Just because David Miscavige has small hands doesn't mean he has a small second dynamic. His whole family have pretty much, apart from his sister, have abandoned him. But he does seem to have a problem there, and forcing, I'm told, hundreds of women to have abortions. That's not, Hubbard was nasty and did horrible things. He was a petty sadist, a tyrant. But Miscavige is something else altogether. That, there is something truly, profoundly unpleasant about that human being, the horrors that he has subjected people to. No, but I don't want to skim over this OT8 document. So what's the deal? Because to me, it looks and it feels exactly like Hubbard sat down and wrote the whole thing and said, in one go. It doesn't feel like it's been taken from different areas. What's the deal with that? What's going on?
But what Jesse said was that that bulletin was only on the course for a week, that they wouldn't show it to him, that OT8 was released, even though he was the senior CSN, he didn't see it before it was released. And people were doing it and leaving. They were just leaving. Yeah. And so they withdrew it. Jesse got to look at it and said, this is Mitoff. He's put this together. So there are sentences that perhaps aren't Hubbard. I for years, with Story of a Squirrel, the Mayo was the bird dog in the control room, which is meant to be a quote from Hubbard. When I first read that, I couldn't believe that Hubbard would say something that was that childish, the bird dog in the control room. Talk about mixed metaphors. But I came to believe that it was Hubbard. And the problem is that Hubbard was having psychiatric problems by this time. So he'd always made crazy utterances. Let's face it, this is a cold-blooded and factual account of your last 60 trillion years, which I've spent the last 2 weeks researching. As a historian, I can tell you, researching 10 years takes more than 2 weeks. Researching 60 trillion years would probably take months. It's a ridiculous claim. But so he makes mad statements. We're all boohoos and weepers and all of that kind of stuff. He makes mad statements. But just about everything is polished by later editors anyway. Althea Hart, Richard DeMille, Althea Hart, and then John Sanborn rewrote things to make them grammatically correct. Because one of the problems that sociopaths have, and you'll hear it in the lectures, it's the same with Donald Trump. If you listen to him speaking, he very rarely ends a sentence in the same tense that he began it in. People just sit and listen to this. But Hubbard is all over the place with his, he misunderstands words. Frequently, he uses a word without having understood what it means. For example, he talks about the genus of an idea rather than the genesis of an idea at one point, just as Trump would talk about the oranges, not the origins. So people come and smooth things over. And you'd have to get hold of Nancy and Jesse to ask them what they think are the Hubbard bits and not. I could hazard some guesses, but
well, anyway, I think that the whole thing's pretty much written by him, because I've read things that were written by Mary Sue,
much, yeah.
but by Mary Sue, you can tell when it's written by Mary Sue or written by David Mayo. I mean, I believe it's a fake document, the one that Pat Broker and Annie Broker wrote, and then Captain Bill's stuff is telepathic communication. I can notice the difference, and then when you get hit by Hubbard, you're like, nah, this is Hubbard, and that Truth Revealed document sounds like Hubbard.
It does, and there are just connecting phrases. The majority of the meat of it is Hubbard. I agree.
Oh, by the way, did the pilot say? I heard the pilot said that Captain Bill added that Jesus was a pedo bit in Truth Revealed.
I'm sorry, that who said?
The pilot. Do you know the pilot, the independent guy that's called the pilot? I can't remember his name, his real name. Oh, anyway, don't worry. I just heard that, and it's not very definite.
Yeah. Next question.
Okay, we're getting close. This is good.
Amazing.
So well, this thing with Hubbard and the E-meter blowing up, I mean, you actually believe that he actually wanted an E-meter or something that would blow him up and get rid of the body theics?
I'm going to try and make a point again that there's what I know, which is, that Hubbard said things like the law can be used very easily to harass. And he talked about fair game destroying people. That's what I know. And then there's what I can speculate about. And in this case, it would only be speculation. And my opinion is worth something, because I'm a court-appointed expert witness. I'm the only person in the world who has the right to go into court and give speculative opinions about Scientology. But I still prefer not to do it, so I want people to see, so again, talking about, whether Hubbard's sexual activities, I don't have concrete evidence for any of that. I don't want somebody who's involved in Scientology to see, oh, well, Jon Atack accused Hubbard of that. I want people to be very clear that I can have an opinion about something, and it's just my opinion, could be right or wrong, and I can know something. So, for example, one of the things I know absolutely is that Scientology's never had millions of members. And the reason I know it absolutely is that I have a document published by Scientology which actually records the membership of Scientology at a time when it was claiming millions of members. And this document it's a wonderful document. It actually has the membership, including the members with honor status. This document was never meant to leak, and it was handed out to the mother of a Scientologist without them realizing that she was actually desperate to get her son out. And I can't find the page, having gone through. Isn't it ever thus? A friend of mine called Johnny Jacobson did a review of the membership claims over the years, and it is in here somewhere. I hope it's in here somewhere, because this document was published. It's the 10th anniversary annual report to members of the IAS, and 10 years guaranteeing the future of Scientology. And I may have picked up the wrong thing here. This is terrible. I can't see it. It's got a chart, and it basically says that there are 25,000 members in the International Association of Scientologists. I think I have picked up the wrong document here.
And what year was that?
This one is the IS is founded in this is the wrong one. In 84 it's founded. I've got something from I've got one of these from 1985, I think, which says there are 25,000 members. paid up members all around the world. That's the whole membership of the International Association of Scientologists, which I'll have to go and find it and stick it up somewhere so that it can be seen now, because I've said, you see, I have the evidence, and I didn't. And that's not really very good, is it? But all of these claims of millions of members, when David Gaiman, he was the first to say there are 5 million Scientologists in the 60s. A friend of mine said to him, how did you know that? And he said, oh, it was a guess. It's an estimate based on anybody who ever bought a book or ever did a Dianetic Book One session or anything like that. Once you said 5 million, you have to keep increasing the number. The highest I've seen is 11 million. And then you get to these, the IRS event, and I think they clocked 6,000 people there. That's as many people as they could get to the biggest event they've ever held. So it's very small. In fact, the free zone is much bigger, probably, than the Church of Scientology. I think when Russia and Germany were majorly involved in the free zone, and I don't think they are anymore. I think a lot of people have just left. But I think there were tens of thousands, possibly 100,000 people in the independent movement when there were only 25,000 in the Church of Scientology, so-called.
Okay, well, this level of certainty that we're talking about, like, let's say with Hubbard's affirmations, like the men are my slaves and stuff like that. And what isn't one of them like, men will follow me and they won't know why?
I don't recollect that one, but
something like that, like men will praise me and they won't even know why, or something like that. Is that true? Something like that.
I think the evidence for the affirmations, and I'm going to pull them up on screen because I do have the affirmations here somewhere.
Like, what's your level of certainty on that?
The affirmations, I'm absolutely sure of the affirmations.
Because they're absolutely outrageous, those affirmations.
Yeah.
I mean, that is really, because we can go into the areas like the gay stuff, whatever, things that we just don't know. But I mean, the affirmations, I mean, if you know that for sure, I mean, that is really wild.
Yeah, they're a lot of the thing is, you confirm evidence by context, and people who are into conspiracy theories aren't necessarily very good at context. So what's happened here? The affirmations or admissions, they were discovered by Jerry Armstrong. They were basically taken to Omar Garrison. And so I have them in front of me. My service record was not too glorious. I must be convinced that I suffer no reaction from any minor disciplinary action, that all such were minor. My service was honourable, my initiative and ability high. I have nothing to fear from friends about my service. I can forget such things as Admiral Braisted. Such people are unworthy of my notice. Well, Admiral Braisted, when you look to the record, is the guy who wrote an admonition of Hubbard saying that he should never be given a command again. So there's consistent internal evidence to support the admissions or affirmations. I can have no doubts of my psychic powers. My magical ability is high and clear. I earned my titles and command. Any distaste I may have for Jack Parsons originated in a psychic experiment. Sexual feeling has been depressed by several things amounting to a major impasse. To cure ulcers of the stomach, I was given testosterone and stilbestrol. These reduced my libido to nothing. While taking these drugs, I fell in love with Sarah, who of course was Jack Parsons' sister-in-law and girlfriend. She can be most exciting sexually to me because of drugs as above, and so on and so on and so on. And as you say, we come to these, this great long list of statements. They're affirmations.
But there's a slave one. There's one about slaves, isn't there? Men are my slaves or something. Or
men are my slaves. Elemental beings are my slaves. Yeah.
I swear there's one that says people will follow me, or he says something somewhere where he says, I'll create a religion and people will follow me and they won't know why.
Let's put
They'll
the
praise
word.
me and they won't know why.
Praise. Let's try praise. Yeah, he talks about Flavia Julia here, and the all-powerful Flavia Julia, of course, is the Empress who we talked about before. And all this stuff about your penmanship is wonderful, beautiful. You write wonderful poetry. Well, not that I've seen. Your guardian dictates it, the poetry. Again, this is the Empress. This is the woman on the wing of the plane we talked about. People gasp and thrill to your poetry. Thank you for listening. You handle all forms. This is basically a narcissist who's collapsed and is trying to, kid himself. Part of it, of course, is him trying to get his pension by pretending that he was crippled and blinded, which Sarah, who was with him at the time, did talk about. I can't find anything about followers or praise, but you recall all your pastimes on earth. You have and will live forever. You are part of God. You are the crown prince of your small section of the universe. You are just and kind. Yeah, really. You are merciless. That's the next sentence. You're just and kind. You are merciless. He's just a cringing sociopath. What can you say? You use the minds of men. You have a sacred spiritual mind. Lots of it. You know the Skipper letter?
No.
Do you know this? The 1938 Skipper letter where he says he doesn't believe in immortality?
No.
Yeah. That to me is the primary document. It leaked out of the archive. Its provenance is absolutely certain because it's been copyrighted by Author Service Incorporated, Hubbard's agency. And I'm not sure I have it on this machine. Let me see if I do. But I'll pop that over to you at some point. He basically says that his only goal is to smash his name into history so hard that even if all his books are destroyed, he will be remembered. Here, I've got some extracts from it here on this machine. Let's have a look at that. So this is an authentic letter written to Skipper, which is the name, his pet name for his first wife, Polly, Margaret Louise Grubb. Living is a pretty grim joke, but a joke just the same. The entire function of man is to survive. Not for what, but just to survive. The outermost limit of endeavor is creative work. Blah, blah, blah. What about the letter that he wrote to the Veterans Administration begging for psychiatric help? Have you seen that?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah. Take a look back at Blue Sky. The new version does have these things all. And let's sell these people a piece of blue sky as it now is. It does have the quotations directly, and I do have every document.
Well, yeah, I definitely heard somewhere where it said something like men will become my slaves and they won't even know why, or they'll praise me, they won't even work out why, or
yeah. I don't remember that particular wording, and I'm searching the affirmations. I'm not finding followers or praise, but
or slaves or something.
Well, yeah, let's try just slaves. That's a good idea. No. That one aside. Slaves. But yeah, men are your slaves, elemental beings, or body thetans, as they're also known. Mediums of art are your slaves. Oh, that's a good one. What else have we got going up? Men are your slaves, elemental spirits your slaves. You are power among powers, light in the darkness, beauty in all. Material things are yours for the asking. Let's see if there's another one. No, those are the only two with slaves then.
Well, this thing that I remember, I thought it was really interesting because it said they'll be my slaves and they won't know why. And I thought, oh gosh, that's interesting. That really makes me think about like the OT levels and stuff like that, where people are like praising him and they haven't even worked out, like they don't know why they're praising him, or that they're enslaved by him.
Yeah. I mean, he says in the Philadelphia Doctorate course, we have ways here of making slaves. And I think that is exactly what his purpose was. In the Skipper letter, he says, personal immortality is only to be gained through the printed word, barred note, or painted canvas, or hard grabite. I think he means granite. So sculpture. Foolishly, perhaps, but determined nonetheless, I have high hopes of smashing my name into history so violently that it will take a legendary form, even if all the books are destroyed. That goal is the real goal, as far as I am concerned. Things which stand too consistently in its way make me nervous. It's a pretty big job. In 100 years, Roosevelt will have been forgotten, which gives some idea of the magnitude of my attempt. And all this boils and froths inside my head, and I'm miserable when I'm blocked. Let the next man concentrate upon peace and contentment. When life was struck into me, something else accompanied it. And when I leave things in the lap of the gods who seem to be interested in my destiny, boy, things really happen. So, yeah, he's an egomaniac.
Okay,
basically.
well, cool. Well, let's get to the last bit, and I'll ask you these questions like quickly and try and get fast answers for them. So, this is the I'm not ordering you.
You're started for 10 points.
Well, what about at the start of the session where you say this is the session? I mean, it's really odd and strange. What therapist does that? I mean, is that because of the hypnotic thing? This is the session or something like that?
Remember that Hubbard actually explains what he's doing. In a session, you don't ask questions, you give commands. So that is the first command. And the excuse that there's a really funny one. I think it's in Never Believe a Hypnotist, the paper I keep pushing, where he cancelled book one auditing because it's hypnotic. Right? In Science of Survival, he cancels. He says, you mustn't use it. It hypnotizes people. And you can see the hypnosis by the fluttering of the eyelids. And when you look at the book one auditors course from the 70s onwards, it talks about the fluttering of the eyelids. So that's a sign of somebody.
That's what you're supposed to look for.
Yes.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, according to, but he cancelled it. So he
flips it. In 1951, he says this, and then 1970 something, he says the opposite.
Yeah. And if you say to a Scientologist, this is hypnosis, they'll say no. If you say to them, what is hypnosis? They'll say, I don't know. But Hubbard said all auditors must have a grasp of hypnosis. Go figure. So saying this is the session is a hypnotic command.
Yeah, because I mean, like, what does he say? You're supposed to look at them in the eye and say it with tone 40, and it's like what therapist does that instead of sitting down and saying, "All right, we'll start." It's like this is the session. Like it's very strange.
Yeah, yeah.
It really makes me think that it contributes to that sort of person who is suggestible. They go into it, then next minute they're running out some crazy shit, and they're just, I had the most amazing win ever, and it's just they're all in their head and stuff.
And in hypnosis, repetition is a fundamental thing. So auditing sessions he says they're always the same so that they will run out the old ones. Well, that's saying that something was run in the first place. So it's an admission that there is a hypnotic effect of the session. By not varying the commands, by always using the same form, people will actually fall into an altered state. And many people do it. You sit down in the auditing chair and your needle floats because you're going to have a session. You've gone into session. Being in session is an altered state. Yeah,
like some guy is always having problems with his second dynamic. Instead of fixing that problem or changing himself, he doesn't. He just keeps on going in session, getting repairs. He's upset because there's been another upset. He's been around Scientology for 20 years and he sits down and then he's like, I'm going to get high today. Yeah. And they go, this is the session. He's like, I just feel so good after the session. Anyway, I was never one of these people that were like, when I came out of session, I was like, that was so good. Like I always thought, what is this thing where people like get high from sessions? I mean, you're like so keyed out. You're like exterior, like, it feels so good. You're driving in your motorbike. And it's like, what are they talking about?
I saw a guy not long after I got in and he was all covered in bandages. This is in Birmingham. And I asked him what had happened, and he said he'd walked through a plate glass door, and he was grinning, and he said, because I was exterior. And you're going, that's not very helpful. Depersonalization.
I think Captain Bill said a similar thing. He was riding on his motorbike and his hands like froze on his motorbike, and he was like, "Oh, I was just so keyed out after session. I was exterior, and like I didn't realize what was going on with the body." And it's like, I don't know. Okay, so this is the session.
Okay.
Hubbard wrote that he thought Napoleon was a hero. Did he say that?
No, he wrote Napoleon, compared to me, Napoleon as a punk. That's in the Skipper letter in 1938.
So Hubbard never said...
I can make Napoleon look like a punk, but...
He never said Napoleon was a hero?
I've no idea. Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right. He never praised Napoleon?
I don't know. Do I lose points in the exam if I can't point to a reference in the OEC?
It's all right. I'm just interested. So Hubbard made the tech secret after a few splinter groups started. Is that true? That's the first time Hubbard started making the tech secret?
Yeah, the major rift is Ampronistics in the mid-60s, where he loses a huge part of his following. And, the earlier thing like the Joburg, which is it got to be the whole track sec check and the Joburg, come on, have you ever been involved in baby farming? Come on, Andy, tell us the truth. Is that a past life question, or is that relevant to this life? Well, smuggling diamonds is one of the other things. So I think it was specifically because the Johannesburg org had defected. But yeah, I think part of it in 65 rather, is he's lost people. And so he's got to keep the tech secret. And of course, that now is to the obsession of the locked briefcases and all of the stuff with OT8 on the ship. Because it makes you think that it wasn't anything to do with this side effect stuff. It was because it was because it was for political reasons and control reasons and stuff. Yeah, and he was trying to publish Revolt in the Stars, which is meant to kill people. Come on, the OT3 incident. Yeah, next. Okay, good. Hubbard said to his auditors he could never go exterior, or they said he never did go exterior in session. Well, the one I know is about Mary Sue Hubbard, who had a screaming match with him on the ship one day and said, and she's going, "You're a charlatan." And he said, "What do I have to do to prove the tech works?" And she said, "I've never been exterior." So poor Otto Rose was detailed to run every exteriorization process. I think he said he found 90 of them. And after a few weeks, Mary Sue Hubbard just went, "I can't do any more of this. Stop it." So that, he went to exterior. I heard that. I think you went into that with the Chris Shelton interviews. I have been known to tell that story before. It's true. Next. So there's nothing about his auditor saying he never went exterior in session or anything? Well, you see, I can't say there's nothing about that, only that I'm not aware. What you know. Yeah, okay. Did Aldous Huxley try auditing from Hubbard and he couldn't locate engrams? Yes, Aldous Huxley's, there's a 2-volume biography of Huxley, and Sylvia, somebody or other, wrote it. I have a passion for Aldous Huxley. I've read all 11 of his novels, and he's a fascinating character who went off the rails by joining a cult group at the end of his life. There's a bit more to the story. Hubbard turned up at his apartment with Sarah and tried to get an incident. And although Huxley was actually supremely hypnotizable, he actually went into a state which he called deep reflection to write novels, where he'd be completely in an altered state. Hubbard was unable to find an incident with him. Huxley complained about the great big box of chocolates that his wife had brought, which was really garish. The story carries on, however, with Huxley. His Laura Archera Huxley, his second wife, wrote books which are very similar to some of the visualization or creative processing practices of Scientology. Their daughter, Faith Huxley, I am told, gave $2 million to Scientology. Whether this was to get them to leave her alone or for auditing, I'm not sure, but it's not a story I've been able to confirm. But so there is a tangle there. But yeah, Huxley was very willing to find these incidents, but Hubbard was unable to find one. So is that the auditor's failure? I think it is, isn't it? But we've said he was a crap auditor. What can we say? Well,
Yeah, and he doesn't mention in the Dianetics book, oh, by the way, sometimes you'll come across a PC that can't find incidents. Like he just exaggerates how perfect his tech is in 1950.
Yeah, and Huxley appears to have had a pretty good memory, so I don't know why it wouldn't work, but there you go.
So Hubbard said that you can control people by giving them conflicting statements.
Yes, it's the false data stripping where he talks about putting somebody into a confused state by giving them conflicts. I developed a whole idea of this, which I wrote about at the Underground Bunker, which is the double bind theory. And it happens so often in Scientology. You know, when somebody asks for a refund, you give them their money back. When somebody asks for a refund, you never give them their money back. Some idiot has said that you can only call FNs between 2 and 3.5 on the tone arm. The idiot was L. Ron Hubbard. The bulletins sit next to each other in the solo pack. Again and again. Again, really, anybody who's looking at this should read Never Believe a Hypnotist. Because there you will find hypnosis was never used in the research of Dianetics. Dianetics is an extension of hypnotic research. Both of those statements are made in Modern Science of Mental Health. What is fascinating is we didn't notice it. We didn't notice.
I know, but we think we had an MU or something like that. That's the problem. We think, oh, we've got to do a demo or something like that.
We justify the reality, which is that Hubbard was inconsistent to a dangerous extent. I mean, Dianetics, he gives two accounts. It was either written in 3 weeks or 6 weeks, but it contains so many contradictions within the text. And it will carry on. You know, the attacks on Scientology, the 4 policy letters I mentioned from February 1966, when he's about to found the Guardian's office. The broad public issue one is advocate total freedom. That's all we do when we're attacked. And the one is find their crimes and publish them, you know, the 4th one. So there's this conflict that runs all the way through Scientology, and bear in mind that he puts through the idea that it's a 2-terminal universe. All of the OT, you know, the R6, the clearing course, the original OT1, OT2, they're all about term and op-term, a terminal and opposition terminal. This idea of this, you were locked in, the implants, the R6 bank is made by these to be or not to be confusions, that conflict, and then he will do the same thing to you. He will give you conflicting information. You know, you never evaluate for the pre-clear. This is what happened to you 75 million years ago. Never evaluate for the pre-clear. But this is what happened to you 75 million years ago. So those conflicts and all of the things that apply to others, you know, if you're ill, it's because you're connected to an SP and you're PTS, or, you know, you might be type 3, or you might be a restimulation of a past SP. If Hubbard's ill, it's because he's researching. You know, if nasty things happen to you, it's because of your overts. If they happen to Hubbard, it's because he's a champion for humanity. If you become hostile or critical, then that's because of your missed withholds. When Hubbard goes on about psychiatrists and all of that, that's because that's the reality. If you use a generality, it's because you're a suppressive. When Hubbard generalizes about all psychologists, all psychotherapists, all psychiatrists, that's not a generality. The different set of rules for him and for us. And we'll never be able to discover technology no matter how OT we become. Never.
There was some complaints by Rosicrucians that Hubbard took their tech.
Yes, I contacted, because I spoke with a Rosicrucian, a high-level Rosicrucian who was also a Scientologist, and he said, I can't tell you anything, but there is some crossover between these things. And I got lucky. I wrote to the Ancient and Mystical Order of Rosicruci, the AMORC. I didn't realize how many different Rosicrucian organizations there were, but this was an American one. I wrote to them and they said, yes, he did 2 neophyte degrees in the 1930s.
Okay. And
he's on the record.
But and a Rosicrucian mentioned to you that and they were complaining like Hubbard took some of the tech.
Yeah, and the particular complaint was definitely about body thetans. It was definitely they believe in little entities being involved, and they felt that he'd stolen that from them. But crikey, everywhere you go, people believe that. Gadons in Tibet, Dibuks in Judaism, demons in Christianity. It's not a new idea.
No. Yeah, it's true anyway. Because I mean, I went to a Rosicrucian meeting, and they somehow it came up. They mentioned something like, "Oh, the body is made up of all these spirits," and they just casually mentioned it in the conversation. I was like, I was like, yeah, that was good to hear that. I was like, oh, lucky I got that, because that was, I don't know if they just slipped up or something, whoever said this, but I imagine that imagine it was a slip up. But I imagine there probably isn't as much fear, because you wouldn't get that sort of stuff in Scientology. In the years I was involved with the church, no one accidentally mentioned these sort of things unless I didn't recognize it.
Yeah, I mean, the great scientist Leibniz believed in the 17th century, believed that everything in the universe is a living spirit. So all of the atoms or monads.
Doesn't Hubbard sort of believe that that all the objects, everything actually is a spirit, and with his tone scale, he's got controlling bodies or being objects and stuff, and those entities are being objects, and so everything is just a spirit.
Yeah, something is it's a possible interpretation of his ideas. Absolutely, yeah.
But do you think Hubbard believed that everything was spirits?
I think he believed everything was out to get him, and by the end of his life, and when he was doing OT3, all the body thetans had come alive, and they were going to get him, and so everything in the world was out to get him, and it was all alive. Yeah, nut job.
Is there an OT level that deals with body thetans in parallel universes?
Not yet, but I'm sure we could sell one.
That sounds like, that's, So you didn't hear anything about that?
No, Captain Bill he'd got it that you could put the whole org board into the OT levels. So you could run, a Div 6 body thetan and oh, crikey.
Did he actually have that?
Yeah.
Use a Div 6 body thetan.
Well, he said that you if you put the tech, with the OEC, that obviously, and I didn't know what he was talking about. I was lost by then. Other than it would take you forever and cost a fortune, which is, of course, the purpose of Scientology.
Yeah, he took it to a new level by making OT 44. I mean, that's really out there. And then he also weirdly switched it, because apparently it becomes admin levels, and so it's like, well, if it's admin, then why did you make these as OT levels? And maybe it should have been on the other side of the bridge as Thingos, but why did you go up to Thingo with admin? I mean, this is just, what the hell?
If Captain Bill was so intelligent, why, when he got a tumor in his throat, wouldn't he let them puncture his throat so he could breathe? Why did he strangle to death if he was that OT?
I know, it's pretty sad.
It's very sad.
How can I read the document that Captain Bill wrote in the church before he was kicked out, where he said that the church was taken over by Markabians and is an implant? The church is an implant. He wrote some document that he tried to get out when he was involved with the church, and it spread a bit.
I've never seen that. I mean, he pretty much says that in the sector operations bulletins. His claim to me was that the Markabians were in Switzerland. There were 200,000 of them already by 1983. Their front group was Transcendental Meditation, and they would take the world over by 1986. And they would do that by manipulating the price of gold.
Okay, now this is what I'm really interested in, is how does Captain Bill come to his truth? Does he sit down on the e-meter and read out, because let's say the groups that he says was infiltrated by Markabians, does he sit down and read out CNN and then look on the meter, and if it reads, he goes, okay, it's Markabian. ABC, okay, Playboy magazine, okay, it's Markabian. How does he come to his truth? How does he write these books?
He uses what's called knowingness.
So he doesn't check these things on the meter.
Well, why would he? If he knew them, why would he need to check them on the meter?
So he uses the past life technique, that when you really feel certainty, you just know it, and that's how it's the truth.
He researches in the same way that Ron Hubbard researches. If it's in my head, it must be true. He sat in a wardrobe and wept and these ideas came to him.
So he came up with 200,000, that figure. You sure you didn't sit down and try and look for reads on the meter to locate 200,000?
Why would it read on the meter?
I don't know.
If I go, how many giraffes are there in London Zoo? If I sit on an e-meter, will it tell me?
Well, the same way that he uses it for, like, when you're doing correction list or something, like,
Yeah, but you'd have to have the information to be able to check it on the meter, wouldn't you?
But
so
if Thetan knows.
Ah, Thetan knows everything, so you don't need the e-meter, do you? You just know it.
Did you see Bill when he was composing some of these materials?
Bill had they're all dated. What's the last one in there? It's the coordination, blah blah blah. I think he's finished the new civilization game, the free zone strategy, step 26. Gosh, I had this is a compilation that he sent to me. I did have the Scientology plan for world peace. We'll see that, won't we? Yeah, this is an interesting one. I hadn't noticed this. This is a statement. It's so many years since I looked at this thoroughly. I did do little. It's the Third World War. I think this is the last one. No, this is February 8. Yeah, February 84. So this is after I met him in October 83. OT Project Bulletin number 21, the Third World War, which in it says slavery never attained anything for the slaves, only for the masters. That's not a very profound statement, really, but it's a truth about Scientology, that's for sure. But the list of organizations that, suppressive organizations goes on for pages. And it's got ridiculous things on it. It's like, the Bugs Bunny Club, and that's not actually one of them. I'm trying to find it in here. I thought I got it marked.
No, I know it. I've seen it.
Yeah, and it's just basically anything that had pissed Bill off. He told me this story that when he was in LA, he was the head of the advanced org there. And the story is, and I don't know if this is true, that when he arrived there were two lesbians running it, and they were having sexual orgies. And this did happen in Scientology organizations. The Manchester organization, there were sexual orgies there in the 70s, which thankfully I missed because I don't think I'd be into that kind of thing, really.
Were they doing it in the org? It wasn't in the org, was it?
I think the org building was part of what was going on. And I don't want to mention the head of the organization. One can check it out. And it was in the 1970s, late 70s. And this guy was basically, he decided that everybody had to have sex with everybody else. That would be, a lovely thing. But anyway, when Bill arrived in LA, there was this idea of these two lesbians, and they were into bondage and stuff like this. And he decided that wasn't a very good idea. So he had his crew doing their day's work and then going up on the roof and watching for the spaceships to come. A friend of mine who was there at the time says this isn't true, but another friend says, well, I had to do it. But Bill told me that he traced down the two psychiatrists that were the cause of all the trouble. And he went and personally threatened them, and they left Los Angeles. As you would, he was 6'4", It's a lunatic motorcycle cop comes around and knocks on your door and says, you're the cause of all the problems in this sector of the galaxy. You probably go, I think I'm leaving town. The proof that this wasn't so, however, is that the problems of the galaxy didn't go away. And Bill just kept identifying, who was wrong and what they were and fitting it together into this ever more crazy scenario.
I thought the attacks only came about when we don't deliver what we promise or something like that from KSW.
And we always deliver what we promise.
Yeah.
We've been making clears since 1927 or, whenever it was. Yeah, here's the list. I've got it. It's Sector Operations Bulletin 18. The Masons, the Rosicrucians, the Middle Earth Society. Those are followers of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. Watch them.
Yeah, watch.
Bloody elves,
So
particularly.
he's saying the Markabians have taken over the Middle Earth society.
Yeah, the Golden Dawn, which was an extinct magic society. The Great White Brotherhood. The Great White Brotherhood is the pretend group of Tibetan masters that Helen Blavatsky channeled in the 19th century. Mensa, the organization for geniuses. Transcendental Meditation. The Church of Scientology of California.
It's basically every single thing except his org.
Everything that's annoyed him in the slightest. The Red Brigades. I think we know that the Red Brigades, a terrorist organization, were a bit nasty. The Better Business Bureau, the Rotarians, the World Bank, of course. Ban the bomb groups. Anybody that's against nuclear war, they're Markabians. The BBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, the Associated Press, the United Press, Reuters, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the Club of Rome, the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, it seems like he's transplanting the word evil for Markabian, and he's saying that all these groups are infiltrated by evil, but the Middle Earth Society, I find, is probably the most ridiculous out of all of them. I mean, how could they be evil?
Well, as you say, he's also got Playboy magazine and the National Enquirer and the London School of Economics. He's got a list of American fraternities: Rho Delta Epsilon, Delta Sigma Rho, Phi Kappa Psi, things like that. Humanists. And that's not even an organization. That's just people who believe we should be nice to people, you know. On and on, pages of it. He was nuts. Next question. We must be coming near the
very
end.
close, very close. This sort of relates to it, but is there a bulletin from the early 80s saying LRH's body has been taken over? And was it written by Captain Bill?
It wasn't written by Captain Bill. It's called the Original Founders Bulletin. It was published in 1982, and it upset David Miscavige tremendously. He had a screaming rant at the Mission Holders Conference about it. And what it says is, and it came out red on white. So it went all over the world, red on white. It's like when I published a Suppressive Person Declare of Miscavige, I did it on goldenrod, and we sent it to all of the orgs. And it was said that in Chicago, cheering burst out when they're ready to muster. Yeah, that was 1984, high point of my career, declaring Miscavige suppressive. But this was a red on white, the Original Founders Bulletin, so it looked like a technical bulletin. And it said, I'm the real L. Ron Hubbard. I was pushed out of the body, I think in 1952, and I've come back. And the bloke that you've been following is actually Zeno. You know, he's the opposite of me. He's the bad one. And a lot of people believed it. Robin Scott, the infamous Robin Scott, phoned me up and said, have you seen this? Isn't it marvelous, John? I said, oh, come on. It's complete nonsense. You know, it's just some guy who's having a prank, you know, because he didn't come back again.
Do you know who wrote it?
No, whoever did it knew that if they were caught, they'd get in a lot of trouble. So but whoever wrote Story of a Squirrel Part 2, and if anybody out there has a copy of Story of a Squirrel Part 2, my copy is missing. And that was the funniest thing I've ever read about Scientology. It's where the senior CS, who calls himself Ray Mittberg, declares himself. And, you know, it's basically somebody taking the Mickey out of Story of a Squirrel. It's very funny. And I can't find my copy. Somebody's stolen it. Okay,
so with this document, somebody managed to get this document released within the church on red on white, and it was
not within the church. They just sent it out to the orgs and to individuals in Scientology.
Okay, it basically says that you've been following an SP, and that Hubbard's body was taken over in 1952. And the person supposedly writing it had reincarnated, and it was back again. Was it who?
Or he inhabited another body, or
So the person who was writing it was LRH. The actual real LRH got kicked out in 1952. Is that what they were suggesting?
That was the claim. Yeah, that was the claim. Yeah.
Okay, so it was like
one of the body thetans.
What was the goal of it? Was it just a prank, or was it a way to get people to leave the church and join independence or something?
No, I think it can only have been a prank because there was no follow up.
Okay, that sounds wild.
Yeah.
You said something interesting about Jon Caban. What was interesting about him?
Jon Caban had done the old OT levels. He was OT 7. He'd made a certain amount of money. He sold jewelry, and I think had done quite well. He was Captain Bill's major supporter, and he actually took me aside at one point because I was in the kind of private circle of Captain Bill briefly because they'd appointed me the chairman of the OT Committee UK. And I didn't realise that was anything to do with Bill, really. It was just they suddenly told me that's what I was. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll be that. The committee consisted of me and my body thetans. And of course, I didn't have any body thetans, so that was just me. And so I could declare, David Miscavige and stuff like that. But Caban, because there was a brief period, just a few weeks, where I was in tight with them, Caban said, all this stuff about Markabians, it's not Bill, it's me. And, it's my belief. So that's about all there is to it.
Are you telling me that Jon Caban wrote these?
No, he didn't write the things. He's saying that he was there. Mike Baker Rogers, that was the guy that Bill stayed with. And they were the group, they were the two people who were with Bill as he received these telepathic orders. And Caban said it was him who'd given the idea to Bill that the Markabians had arrived, going back to a 1950s lecture by Hubbard where he talked about the Markabians.
Oh, so if he hadn't mentioned these things, it wouldn't have sent Captain Bill on this mass delusion.
Yeah, well, if Bill had joined the Middle Earth Society, we'd all be hobbits by now or something like that. It'd be much more interesting. You'd all have hairy toes and be quite small.
Okay. And it was this guy, Jon Caban, interesting besides that?
I didn't have much of a conversation with him. He seemed a little bit paranoid to me, I must say, as did Bill.
What was he paranoid about?
They thought that the world was being taken over by aliens. What can I say?
Oh, so he thought that.
You have to be. Yeah.
So he thought that.
Yeah.
Oh, so he legitimately mentioned it to Captain Bill as a theory, and Captain Bill just ran with it.
He told me that, but it's in conflict with what Bill himself was saying. I think Bill had long believed that aliens must be the explanation because the LA psychiatrists hadn't actually solved the problem.
Okay. And why did Ralph Hilton why does he like Crowley? Because I think you said he told you reasons why Crowley was good. I'm just interested in what was good about Crowley.
There are quite a number of Scientologists who are influenced by Crowley, as of course was Hubbard. They recognized that there were aspects of Scientology that were close to Crowleyite belief. It largely came about, an Australian journalist called Alexander Mitchell in 1968 published articles in the Sunday Times in London because he'd unearthed this connection, the Babylon working with Jack Parsons with Hubbard. And they were threatened with suit. It's worth mentioning that Scientology is the most litigious organization in the history of the universe, as far as we know. Nobody has issued, even Donald Trump has only issued 500 court cases against people. Scientology was able to drop 3,000 in a day that were related to the IRS. So they threatened the Sunday Times, and the Sunday Times had gone, well, we don't really want to spend £1 million in court fighting this. And so they published this weird statement, L. Ron Hubbard broke up black magic in America and what have you. But that alerted a lot of people who were Crowleyites to the possibility that Scientology was a form of Crowleyite magic. I met a guy called Carlos in 1975 in East Grinstead, who had been in Scientology, Then he decided to follow his master, Aleister Crowley, and become a heroin addict. So he'd done that for a while. And then he decided that wasn't really the thing. So he got back into Scientology, and he'd done his A to E, and he'd dried out and all of this stuff. And he was in my, only invited him round once, and he sat in my flat and he said, the real point of Scientology is to recruit the majors, like you, Jon, and like me. The rest of them are just drones. But Hubbard's trying to find us, the people who really know, so that we can put... He lasted about another week after that and was thrown out. He quite evidently, as far as I was concerned, was suffering from schizophrenia or some mental illness. But a lot of people were attracted from the Crowleyite fringe. Ralph now denies any association, I believe, but we had conversations at the end of 1983, the beginning of 1984, where he talked about his interest in Crowleyite magic, and that, you know, that he'd understood that Scientology was a form of Crowleyite magic, and he wished to pursue that. But following the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, either I've made this up or he's forgotten it. Those are the possibilities. I'm sticking with my story. As I said in our previous conversation, he was certainly wrong about Steve Bisbee. Steve was a big Crowleyite, you know.
Okay.
I felt that Scientology was a continuation.
What's the point of Crowleyism? Is it all about getting your will and making postulates stick? Is that pretty much it?
It is to become godlike in your powers, to have power over others against their will. I mean, all forms of magic are evil because all of them, white magic or black magic, you know, a love talisman or what have you, you're trying to influence another person without their consent, which is very much what Tone 40 is, of course. So it's an inherent, fundamental idea of Scientology. You will control others without their consent, which is wrong.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of salesman or something like that. Like, here's the book here, you just do a perfect Tone 40, blah blah blah, and you take over the person's mind and they buy the book or whatever you're trying to sell them.
Yeah, you command, as L. Ron Hubbard says, when it comes to sales.
Do you think you got any wins from Scientology at all? Because you do a lot of data evaluation, and you've done the data evaluators course, but you seem to do that in your life. Like, you evaluate data a lot and investigate things.
Let's distinguish between a win, which is a realization of some kind. Since I was born, I have continued to have realizations. I had realizations in Scientology. None of them are substantial. My capacity, you know, somebody asked me a few months ago if my ability to, you know, go on stages and talk and go on camera and all of this stuff had come from Scientology, and I had to say no, actually. It was after Scientology, people demanded that I make public appearances, and even though I was a drummer in bands in my teens, and I'd done that, I was nervous about going on stage, and I've just got used to it, and I love it now. I actually really like going on stage and chatting with an audience. But no, Scientology didn't give me that. I suppose being harassed for 16 years did make me more resilient. But is that the tech?
Yes, it is. I think it is a tech.
And, you know, the experience of Scientology, I've learned a great deal from that, and the experience of being harassed, I must say. Doing interventions, you know, it took me 7 years after I'd left to work out how to sit down with somebody and completely honestly, because most exit counselors and interventionists lie to get into the room, and I wouldn't do that. So to be able to sit down with somebody who, you know, that morning had given a success story and talk with them and get them so they would talk to me, and by the end of the day, they have reconsidered their involvement. It took me 7 years to find out how to do that. And I don't know anybody else who can as yet. In a day, sit with somebody who's a fanatical Scientologist at the beginning of the day and take them through what they need to know, which will be personal, to to say, I need to think about this again. None of the people that I've talked to in that way have continued with independent Scientology. None of them have come to any harm. There are no suicides or anything like that. People have gone on and lived their lives. That's something I gained from the study of Scientology, but it's not something that's a consequence of studying Scientology. The OT levels are flim-flam. The grades are nonsense. You can't find the source of problems and make them disappear. I had a friend from New Zealand, Jon Hansen, and he said, how come it is that we've got the tech on third partying and we do more of it than anybody else? You know, the criticism, the hostility, the sense of being persecuted that so many Scientologists develop, and the inability, the lack of courage, the cowardice that they can't, so many, and this is not true of you, absolutely not true of you, but with so many of them, they're so cowardly that they can't listen to me. They can't read what I have to say, just in case it might persuade them.
Yeah,
it's like, that's not the search for truth.
Yeah, they're scared of it. Like the friend who sent me the message saying, I don't want to hear anything like, and it's like, hey, I'm not trashing Scientology. I'm not trashing. I just said there's some information that was interesting about Dianetics and the origin. Because I understand if I was saying stuff like Scientology is crap, I hate it, it's crap, you're brainwashed, and like attacking and real direct things, but just a little bit of history is like, oh, well, that's too sensitive. It's too much for me. Oh,
and you know, as I said before, if you look at the references in A Piece of Blue Sky, I counted them. There are 1,117 reference notes, which is quite a lot. That's several for every page, nearly about 3 a page. And all somebody has to do is go and check the references, and what they'll find is the majority of those references are not embittered ex-Scientologists talking about Scientology. They're Ron Hubbard. They're things he said.
Yeah. That's where I think you're like kryptonite. I think that's the word, kryptonite to Scientology, because you highlight Hubbard and his own his own contradictions, like the hypnosis thingo and stuff.
Yeah. And I've always maintained friendly relations with the public and the environment, as Aaron Hubbard puts it, which is something Scientology is incapable of doing, which means that I've never fallen out with independent Scientologists. You know, as I said, Steve Bisbee, who made his living from auditing. I've known a number of people who do that. I'm not an antagonist towards people's beliefs. If somebody wants to look at this stuff and go, yeah, but I still think auditing's a good idea. Steve used to give people OT3, which I disapproved of, but we were friends. And I trusted Steve enough to know that if somebody did get messed up, he'd do the right things. You know, he'd come and ask me to help, basically. But, a number of, I had friendships with a number of people who carried on practicing Scientology, because that's not the point. The point is, I've got friends who are Christians. I don't believe in God. Yeah, I've got friends who are Buddhists.
And the thing is, you're never going to, if you're going to have a problem with people who you disagree with, you're going to have a big problem. So it's just it's something that everyone has to face. You just,
And so I think being grown up is having compassion towards everybody, including people like Ron Hubbard, or Rajneesh, or Sun Myung Moon, or Hitler. You know, having compassion towards them. I think that if people are criminal, dangerous psychopaths, they should be locked up so they can't harm, like Hannibal Lecter, they should make sure they can't bite people's noses off. But you should not punish them. You should not treat them and degrade them in any way. You should just keep them from hurting other people. So, that's my attitude. I've got, so as I said, when Ken Urquhart called me an anti-Scientologist, it was like, no, Ken, I'm a pro-Scientologist. I've never RPF'd anybody. I've never thrown anybody overboard. I've never broken up a marriage. have never bankrupted anybody, as Scientology has so many times. Scientology is anti-Scientologist. I'm pro-Scientologist. I want people to, survive and flourish and prosper. I don't necessarily want them to splurge on it, as Aaron Hubbard said, because I don't really know what that means, and it sounds a bit horrible. But I do want people to flourish and prosper, as he said. Only I mean that, and he very evidently didn't.
Well, it seems that the data evaluators course, I think it helps people question things, and it helps make them leave Scientology.
I don't know. It didn't help me leave, and I think it's a crock of shit. So I would definitely read Aristotle and Socrates, which is what I read before Scientology, and I found out a great deal more about logic from them. Then the data series is confusing, it's wrong, and it was used to create Scientology, which is a mess. When Jesse Prince talked at Toronto, he said he had the overview of the statistics from all of the orgs, and that St. Hill, which had 180 staff, didn't have as many auditing completions and training completions as the 7 individuals in East Grinstead who were in the independents. That's how crackpot the management system.
Is that the whole management tech and everything and all the, because I noticed that when I got involved with Ideal Org in Melbourne, I looked and I was like, hold on a second. You've got this small handful of like auditors and soups, and then all these admin people. And I was like, what the hell?
And they're all spying on each other. So you've got, the flag rep is spying on the L. Ron Hubbard communicator who's being spied on by OSA. This is a paranoid system. When I found out about how Hitler ran the Third Reich, it was like, oh my God, he set up separate individuals who were always battling with each other over the same territory. And he just left it and read the newspaper, much like Hubbard. Hubbard, would sit back and do what he was doing. A lot of Hubbard's life, when you follow you can see where he was during the bulletins. He was just going on holiday all the time. And, talking about how it took 200 people to take his job at St. Hill. Well, he was off in Rhodesia or South Africa or Australia having a good time. And people like Herbie Parkhouse and David Gaiman were working really hard to make sure that huge amounts of money flowed into his bank account so he could go on holiday to Gran Canaria for a month or wherever, and have a nice Jaguar car and a big mansion and, be the Lord of the Manor.
And there's lots of cross orders that goes on between this thingo and all these cross order thingos. And then when you're new to it, they get you to read cross orders and you don't know what these sorts of things are. And because they can't explain the idea, you're reading it and you're like, if someone just walked over and said, it means that this person says do this person says do that, and then they have a clash, you go, oh, I get it. It's so much easier. But you're like, what's the meaning of cross? Anyway.
Technical degrades is an essential policy. I should make a list of 10 essential policies. Technical degrades really confuses you completely because it says everything I've said is true, even when I contradict myself. And you can't say, as I heard so often, this is the more recent issue, so it's true. So it's all true, even when it's completely contradictory. And at that point, you're going, this guy is out to control us. He's not, his organizational system doesn't work. His tech is all lies. There are no clears, there are no OTs. It's just a way of getting people euphoric and getting them addicted so they will destroy their lives to give to L. Ron Hubbard. $648 million, all taken from Scientologists when he died. And that's the money he hadn't managed to spend. And
that's a really,
just facing people. And it wasn't, when he left it, $500 million of that went to the Church of Spiritual Technology, which has as its initial purpose to perpetuate the name L. Ron Hubbard. My only goal is to smash my name into history. $500 million, not for the welfare of the starving, not for humanity, not for the goals of Scientology, to keep me famous forever. He didn't need to. I'll keep him famous forever. his story is so brilliant that people will be telling it for centuries. They'll be going, "You'll never believe what these people did."
And what I think is bad about the management thing is that when you have all these admin people, they all take money that could be going to the actual tech delivering people, and it messes up the financial profitability of it. And part of the reason why it like boomed and stuff in the 70s was that missions were run by private businesses, and they were getting lots of people into Scientology, not the whole admin tech and Hubbard stuff.
Yeah, there's a brief period where the missions, you know, under people like Dean Stokes, Brent Corridon, Kingsley Wimbush, they were astonishingly profitable. Just a few years, probably from 74 to 82, when the Hubbard, believing that the missions were going to rebel against him, which they were, because they thought Hubbard was gone and he couldn't show that he was there anymore because the FBI would come and arrest him. And so he was stuck in this place, and he believed they were against him. And the reality was they were totally devoted to him, and he destroyed it. Absolutely destroyed it. Then in the 90s, Jeff Hawkins actually gets Dianetics back onto the bestseller list. And as he says in Counterfeit Dreams, the way he did this was to ignore everything Hubbard had said about marketing and just do the standard stuff that was done in the real world. And he made it successful again, which is incredible. A 1950 book getting back onto the bestseller list, a book that is interminable and unreadable, back on the bestseller list.
Yeah.
And then they trashed Jeff.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it works, you know. Who is a brilliant guy, by the way. I really like Jeff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for doing these interviews. I think that was really good. I got to ask everything, which was just great. That was
good.
That was really good.
Let's come back at some point in the future when you feel like it. If you know, I would advise, I'd like it if you carried on your podcast and explored further out into other ideas, because you're highly intelligent, you're highly astute, and you're asking the right questions. And your journey forward from now is going to be of great interest. So you know, come back to me if ever and whenever you want to, and we'll talk again.
Yeah, I might expand into other things. I do still want to interview maybe 2 other people or something on science.
Oh, I'm your last interview. You said I'd be. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's good.
No, but what I can do is I can save part 3 and I can post part 3 really down the track, so it definitely is the last.
Well, we will probably post it before then, so we won't tell anybody that knows you that we've done that. But just keep on going with it. You know what I think what you do, and again, let me really make, you know, I don't care what you believe. What I care is what you do. If people, you know, they're Jewish or Christian, they've got a book that says that you should stone gay people to death, right? That's what the Bible says. It also, by the way, says you should stone people who touch pigskin to death. So, you know, it could be quite nasty around here. You should stone adulterers to death. Their Holy Scripture says that. None of the Jews or Christians I know does that. So I don't have a problem. It's how they interpret and practice it. And it seems to me that you're a good human being, and you're seeking to do something positive in the world. So I don't really care what you believe. Yeah, I care what you do. And that, you know, that your ethics are in, let's say. So in Scientology, you know, when I first talked with Mike Rinder after these many years, and he talked about our first meeting in 94, 95, our only meeting before that. And he said, you know, I seemed like a nice chap, but he knew he had to destroy me because I was opposing Scientology. And I think he's understood now that that's not a good way to be, you know.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm not totally sure what I'm going to do, but I do. A part of me doesn't want to get addicted, because I do feel that Scientology has this addictive, whether you're in or outside the church, it's got this addictiveness to it that you know, you're just like, oh, what the hell is going on here? And, oh, you know. I
managed 17 years away from it, from 1996. I didn't read about it. I wasn't bothered about it. I am retiring. I retired from the Scientology thing specifically. I did 2013 to 2015. And I really implore you and anybody else to watch the Getting Clear videos from Toronto, because that is the summation of my work. Of course, Blue Sky, the dozen papers I wrote which so many people say, you know, Hubbard and the occult, Scientology, religion or intelligence agency, never believe a hypnotist. I spent a lot of time finding these things out. And most of the, you know, even looking at academic histories like James Lewis's appalling book on Scientology, or Gordon Melton's joke of a book on Scientology. And these are PhDs. They won't give you the information. You have to dive really deep. And, you know, my position is probably unique. You know, I'm an expert on this subject because I've spent 40 something years around it. As I say, though, 17 years out. Come June this year, I'll be 66. I'll be slowing down my channel. My interest will move away from, I'm not really that interested in Scientology. My interest is in preventative work so that teenagers can learn how to recognize human predators, salespeople, religious gurus, this kind of people, what the seduction, recruitment, sales techniques of these people are, and how to tell facts from fiction. And that's been my work in the last 7 or 8 years. Firstly with the Open Minds Foundation. And I have a book, Opening Our Minds, which gets into some detail about that. I'm done with all of that. Come June, I will be an artist again, and I will have hopefully conversations with friends such as yourself occasionally, but I'll no longer be involved in this. And I've said pretty much what I need to say about Scientology. And I can assure you, I don't, since 1996, I've not done any historical research into Scientology. I don't read The Bunker, though I absolutely support Tony Ortega and he's a great friend. And I did, you know, proofread The Unbreakable Miss Lovely. And I will definitely proofread Chris Owen's book about the Guardian's office, because that's going to be astonishing. He's been to all the government inquiry report centres, gone through the hundreds of thousands of documents, found lots of things that I won't have seen, and he will give a definitive history. I'll help people do that. But no, the addiction, it can be cured. I promise you it can be cured. I'd like to see you talking to people from other belief systems, you know, in the way that Chris Shelton has, and, you know, making the broader journey. And I'm very happy to make any suggestions at any point about.
Yeah, there is someone who I want to interview, someone from, I think, Melbourne, who did Landmark. Yeah, Chris Shelton interviewed her, but I want to ask her some questions and stuff. So
yeah, that would be great.
With your contact, you're still going to post some of these cool interviews you've done in the past and some of these old things. You're going to put them on YouTube because they'll be awesome.
Yeah, the McMaster, and I've been trying to get hold of Otto Rose for several years, and he's not responding. So I think I'm just going to put up what I did with him. Otto is really funny because he's great. I just love the guy. I haven't seen him for 20 years now, but he. When he first came to see me, he handed me a 27-page, he's that efficient. He handed me a 27-page write-up. He'd already done it. He knew I wanted to interview him. He wrote 27 pages. I talked with him for 3 days, and he gave me a 17-page write-up. He'd pulled 10 pages out. Now, he never asked for the original back. The difference is, before he talked to me, is what a great man L. Ron Hubbard was. After he'd talked to me, and it's largely him telling me his own experience, he'd removed all of the stuff about what a great man Hubbard was. He'd changed his mind because he'd seen information that absolutely conflicted with the image, the fantasy of Hubbard that he had. So, but I think I've got 3 hours with him, and yeah, that'll all go up. Cool. And bits and pieces.
Wow.
But be in touch.
Yeah.
You're a stranger.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for being on my show.
So yeah, you got your book. It's on Amazon, is it? A Piece of Blue Sky?
Let's sell these people a piece of blue sky, and it needs to be the one with which is, I think, fallen off the chair here. I had it a minute ago. Oh no, here it is. It needs to be this one.
Yeah, Rain or something.
Yeah, it's got 100 passages in it that are not in the other book. And also, I only have the proof copy. This will be out in the next few weeks. This is Opening Our Minds. And there's a lot of, it's quite surprised me because a Hubbard aide who's an old friend of mine, who wouldn't read Blue Sky and didn't want to get into these things and works in the field of psychology. He read this book in its original edition, and he said he'd finally worked out what Scientology was. So, which hadn't been my intention. It's it's psychology of authoritarian control, avoiding abusive relationships and authoritarian groups. Yeah. And it shows that what you're exposed to in Scientology is the same everywhere you go. All authoritarian groups use these same tactics and techniques. Well, so,
yeah, and that's on Amazon, right?
Yes, those are both. And there'll be an audio book of Opening Our Minds soon, which is what I'm meant to be working on, rather than talking to you, frankly. But this has been fun.
Yeah, because it's interesting, that book that you've got in the title, Abusive Relationships, because I think that a lot of Scientologists are in love with Hubbard, and it's some sort of love. It might not be sexual, but it's like, I mean, it's definitely not sexual, but it's some sort of love. It is, honestly, and it is like he's taken over their minds, and they're a little bit too in love with him, and they can't see his bad sides or understand him fully.
Absolutely. At Toronto, this wonderful guy, Yuval Laor, came up and shook my hand, and he said, I've been using your work for 20 years. I was like, oh, okay. And he'd done a PhD. And his subject is awe, fervor, and belief. And he is at the leading edge of the understanding of why we become certain about things without evidence. And love is the central idea. You can find his presentations on my channel, free of charge. Awe, Fervor and Belief by Yuval Laor. And it's mind-boggling. I've spent 37 years out of Scientology studying everything there is to know about psychological control, everything I can get. I've studied it in more depth than I've studied Scientology. So, Robert J. Lifton, Robert Cialdini, Anthony Pratkardis, that I know their work. And this guy has added a new section to our whole understanding of why people become enamored and enthralled, which means enslaved, by L. Ron Hubbard. And, so I absolutely recommend that. And he'd talk to you as well if you want to interview him. He's great fun. He's a good friend of mine. We've been working together ever since. Recommend that.
All right.
Do you want to switch off the recording and we'll have a quick chat after that?
Yeah. Thanks for being on the show, Jon. See ya. Jon AtackPART3.
Yeah.